Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you to everyone who has attended today. We are the Ahmadiyya Muslim Medical Association of Canada. I don't know if any of you have heard of us before. Basically, the Jamaat does have multiple professional associations, and we're one of them. Every year, alhamdulillah, we have been trying to organize an event to promote medicine, to encourage people to apply to medicine, and to help people apply, and to explain the process. And this is the 4th year that we have been doing this. And every year, sometimes the attendance fluctuates. We're not as concerned, even though you may be concerned, oh, there's not enough people here. We do record the event, and then we place it online. In the past, we had live streamed it, but there were some technical issues with the internet streaming. So we just decide to record it, and then we place it on our website. And then so those who wanted to attend or they can't attend, you can always watch it afterwards. The other thing is we have actually recorded the 2 previous years, and so those recordings are also on our YouTube channel. The only downside of not being here in person is you can't ask some questions and develop that kind of relationship with people who are in medicine or in medical school to develop that mentorship relationship. But regardless, in the future, I'm going to ask you to help us advertise for next year's event. We do ask the administration of the Jamaat to help advertise, but as you know, weekends in the summer are very valuable to people. There's always other Jamaat events happening and people can't make it. So today we are going to be explaining basically, how to apply to medical school in Canada, not the Caribbean process, which we did last year as just an adjunct presentation, but this year, or today, we'll be just focusing on Canada, and also medicine as a career. And the kind of people we have today for the presentation are people that you want to get to know. So I am the president of the Medical Association. My name is Dr. Kashif Ahmed. I practice emergency medicine in Southwestern Ontario region, specifically in Woodstock and St. Thomas, which are the 2 largest regional hospitals within the London, Ontario area. My wife, Dr. Iman Mubani, is a pediatric emergency physician, and she practices in London, Ontario. And one person here was supposed to talk, but she actually was sick. She couldn't make it today. Dr. AMMAC is an internist in the Hamilton area, and she has presented in the past. And then, alhamdulillah, we actually have quite a few medical students who are members of the Jamaat in Canada who are actually in medical school in Canada. 3 of them are present today. Okay. We have 12 in total across the country, and 3 of them, Maham Bushra, she is at UFT, she's in her 1st year. She's on the ladies' side. Kizr Kareem, who is here with us, everyone probably knows him. He's in UFT as well as 1st year student. And Ansar Dawood, who actually will be starting at UFT in September. So we have 3 medical students, all who are affiliated with UFT here in Toronto. And so you should speak to them if you're interested and kind of get their email address. Myself and my wife have been out of that kind of application process for some time, so they are way better at answering specific questions. So one thing is the program is we got started a little bit late, technical issues. We're going to be breaking for namaz at 2 because Zohar is at 2 p.m. So we're going to get started with the presentation, and then the main presentation is by the medical students, the stuff you're actually here to see. And then after namaz, we will have 1 or 2 more presentations before we stop at 3:30. So the program runs until 3:30 p.m. Before we start, though, I just want to know who's in the audience. So on the men's side, I'm just going to pass the microphone to everyone, if you can explain who you are and what stage in your education you're in.
Assalamu alaikum, I'm Sajid Maslan, a 2nd year biochemistry student at York University.
My name is Abbas Chaudhary, and I just finished 3rd year at UFT for biochem.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Friz Berry, and I'm going into 2nd year molecular biology and genetics at McMaster University.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Ali Chorium, and I finished grade 10 in high school.
All right, Jazakallah, we have some parents present. Iman, can you have the girls or the ladies introduce themselves?
We'll go around the table. Assalamu alaikum, my name is Iman Mubani, and I'm Kashif's wife and the pediatric emergency physician.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Maham, and I am one of the 1st year medical students at UFT.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mahnur. I just graduated grade 12.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sara.
finished second year at U of T. Assalamualaikum, my name is Fazala and I just graduated high school. Assalamualaikum, my name is Baria and I'm going to second year of psychology.
Is that it?
That's it, yes.
Okay, perfect. So, you know, in our minds, if we can even help one person get into medical school, then we've done our job. And honestly, the more we get we're promoting higher education. We don't want people to be satisfied. You know, it's fine if you have, you know, if you don't go further than a bachelor's degree. But, you know, as Hazur has mentioned, you know, he's promoting not just medicine, but also, you know, people who get PhDs, etc., in different fields. So higher education is our main goal. Medicine, obviously, is what we are favoring. We're physicians, but you know, hopefully this is beneficial to you today. And afterwards, we will have a Q&A session, so it won't be just presentations. So we'll get started with Dr. Lubani will be giving her first presentation, and I'll bring that up, and then we'll move on to the student presentation.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. So as I mentioned, my name is Imam Bani and I'm a pediatric emergency physician in London at London Health Sciences Centre. And I also work as an assistant professor at Western University. And I'm currently the undergraduate medical education coordinator for our department, the Pediatric Emergency Medicine Department. So if you have any questions about any of that, please come talk to me afterwards. For the brothers and the sisters. So I think one of the things that, you know, people are so tied up in how do I get into medical school that they're not thinking a lot about why, you know, what are my reasons. And I think that those who don't end up succeeding are people who kind of lose steam because they haven't thought about all of that. They end up in a position where they don't know why they're doing it anymore. And so I think it is very important, the concept of self-reflection is important in life, and as Muslims it's a very important concept for us, and as professionals, as students, it's very important as well. So the first step when you want to consider a career in medicine is to think, how am I going to get to know myself? And there's some basic questions that you need to ask. What are my interests? What am I interested in? So, what are my strengths? So if you're someone who, you know, you really enjoy analytical thinking, you really enjoy hands-on work, then medicine is for you. If you're someone who feels queasy, if you see any bodily fluids or any blood, or you really don't like working with people, then maybe it's something that you might reconsider, for example. What are my weaknesses? So what are the things that I need to work on? And these are basic questions you'll have to answer in an interview as well. What are my values? So what do I want when I go to work every day, or when I wake up in the morning every day? What is it that I want to get out of life? What are the things that I value and care about in life? What are my goals? And what makes me happy? Believe it or not, we do want to aim to be happy in life. Do your homework. So all of you here obviously know this. You're at this workshop because you're doing your homework. Attend educational workshops like this one and others. I'm sure there are others available at your university as well. Shadow a physician if you can, or at least speak to a physician. What is their experience? What did they have to go through? Each physician will have their own individual story, but I think you'll find some common themes running through them. If you can, volunteer at a hospital. When I was in high school, I volunteered at my local hospital, and I really found it eye-opening. It's different than what I'm doing now as a physician, but allowed me to see what the environment in the hospital is like and what role I would want to have in that environment. Get involved in research. That's great for whatever you do because it helps you again with your analytical thinking, and it gives you a stepping stone to so many different careers. And get involved in your community, your local community, your international community. So what is it about medicine that I find rewarding and that why am I here talking about it and promoting it? It's an opportunity to help your fellow human beings during a time of need. And you know, it sounds very cliche, but it is true. It's something that I do every day. You also have a very wide scope of practice. So unlike, for example, you know, if you're an accountant, obviously you're always going to be doing accounting, you're going to be working on people's, you know, oh God, I actually don't know what an accountant does. Yes, taxes. In medicine, you actually have many options. So you can do research as a physician. You don't actually have to do clinical work. You can work in research looking for cures for different diseases, and many of my colleagues do that. You can work in education. So myself, my interest is in medical education. That's why I am doing the undergraduate medical education position. Clinical work, which is what most people think of when they think of a doctor, you at the bedside with your patient, doing tests and examining your patient, but that's only part of what you do as a doctor. Administrative work, so I know many physicians, for example, Eric Hoskins, our last Minister of Health, is a physician, but he became a Minister of Health and he did administrative work, which is very important because this is how you affect change in our healthcare system. And then health advocacy. So, for instance, advocating for refugee populations. My sister-in-law does a lot of work with refugees who came from Syria and other refugee populations. Health advocacy. My brother works still in Gaza as an emergency physician and advocates for the people of Gaza. So there are many things. Lifelong learning. This is not something where you just graduate school and that's it, you're done. I constantly attend conferences, I read all the time. There are things I'm learning all the time. And that's wonderful because it stimulates you. You never get bored. And of course it's a respected and honored profession. This should not be the only reason you do medicine, but it's nice. You know, oh, Dr. Lubani, you get a respect. Sometimes people will see me with my hijab and kind of look down on me, and then when they discover that I'm a physician, all of a sudden they don't think I'm just a stupid, oppressed Arab woman. And then finally, financial security. And as a grown-up who has a family, you realize that's actually important. I never thought that mattered when I was in school. That was not part of my decision-making process. But it really does matter that I can feed my kids, that if God forbid something happens to my husband, I can take care of the family. These things are important. I can make donations, I can contribute, you know, in charity if I choose to contribute somewhere. These are all things that matter and that make life so much more pleasant. And then you have flexible working hours. So, for instance, in my I work 10 days a week, 10 days a month. So I work 8-hour shifts, 10 days a month. And I chose to do that because I have a young child and another one on the way. And as a physician, you can make these choices. Some careers in medicine are harder to do that than others, but that there exists that possibility for you in medicine. Whereas, for example, if I worked you know, in a legal firm or in certain other jobs, that option is not there for me. The joy of interaction with patients and families, especially for me, I work with children. It's amazing. It's a lot of fun. I love working with the kids, and I enjoy my job. The ability to make a difference in people's lives. I can't count how many times in even a single day someone will say, oh, thank you, you listened to me. No one's listened for a while. Or thank you for referring me to the right person, or whatever it is that you did. And that's very rewarding. And then becoming an advocate for people who cannot speak for themselves. So in my case, especially children, where there are cases of suspected child abuse or cases of, you know, where the child is you know, might be harmed. I find it very rewarding being able to speak up for them, being in a position where I can advocate for them. Dr. Kashif Ahmed wanted me to put this in, my husband wanted me to put this in because he wanted you to see how many options. I think people think of medicine and they think either you're an internist or you're a surgeon, but there are many, many, many other options out there in medicine. And this is just a list. Actually, it continues. This is a list from the CARMS, the Canadian Matching Service. website of all the things that you can do. And I'm not going to read it because you can read as well as I can, but it's a long list. And even that is not a full list because many of these specialties branch off into subspecialties, into even more narrow specialties. So you have lots of options. You know, if you're that person who doesn't like people, well, you can become a pathologist or do laboratory medicine. If you're that person who loves not talking to people and just putting them to sleep, you can become an anesthesiologist. If you love rashes, you can become a dermatologist. And finally, okay, you've thought about all this, you've sat down, you've taken some time to reflect, you've gotten to know yourself and done your homework, and you're still not sure. That doesn't mean you don't want to do medicine. Keep your options open as you go through school, and when you choose your courses, choose in such a way that you have multiple different options. So for example, when I was an undergrad, I wasn't 100% sure I wanted to do medicine, so I prepared myself that if I chose to do law school, the other option I thought of was law school, that I would have the courses required for that. So if you know you might want to do pharmacy, or you might want to do, you know, play banjo in a band or something, then keep all of that open and gear your courses towards that. And again, get to know yourself. If you know yourself, the more you get to know yourself, the more life, you know, makes sense to you. And if you dream it, you can do it. So work hard and dream big. There's no sense dreaming big without working hard, and there's no sense working hard if you don't have a goal. And finally, this is my mother, my role model. Sorry. I always get kind of emotional. This is Dr. Sara Lubani, and she is a pediatrician and a neonatologist who worked in New Brunswick, and now she works in London, Ontario. And she is the best physician I know, and just an amazing human being, an amazing mother of 4 kids too. So you can do these things and be a great mother, be a great wife, and all the things that you want to do, a husband, whatever, father. That's the end. If you have any questions, please come and grab me. And I think, Dr. Ahmed, we are going to have our email addresses and contacts available, right, at some point?
Yes.
Thank you.
So basically,
so this is the main presentation, how to get into medical school. So we'll just do a little bit of introductions. I think like whenever we go up, we'll just share a little bit about ourselves. So my name is Khazir Kareem. Alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah Ta'ala.
Do you mind bringing the mic a little bit closer so people can hear you?
Is this better?
Yeah, great.
Okay, great. So we'll just start with just some brief introduction. So whenever, Ansar, I'm not sure if you heard this, not Maham, but if you, once you get up, just give a brief introduction about yourself. So like I said, my name is Khazir, and by the grace of Allah, I got accepted into medical school last year into the University of Toronto. I did my undergrad at McMaster University. I did my bachelor's of I did life sciences there, so I have a bachelor's of science. So I did that in 4 years. Unfortunately, I didn't get in after undergrad. I took a year off. I worked at Toronto General Hospital in cardiology, and that was a good research experience. So we'll talk more about that later too. That if you don't get in right away, it's not the end of the world. And yeah, so we're here now. So I was in your shoes a couple of years ago, and this exact slide came up in a presentation. So the journey to medical school is not a linear journey. It's actually a very analogous to climbing a mountain. There's so many things you have to do, so many hurdles, so many struggles. But at the end, you can see the top, and you can reflect and see how well and how far you've come. So we'll break this image down. And I think we have mostly undergraduate students here, but we have one high school student. Is that correct? So we'll talk a little bit about what you need to do in high school, and then we'll focus on the undergrads and what you guys need to do to be successful. So if there's one thing I can tell high school students to prep them and have them ready for medical school is habits. That's the biggest thing. Next slide. So in high school, a big mistake that students make is that they try to do too much. They get involved in this extracurricular, that extracurricular, volunteering here, volunteering there. And I know the previous presentation mentioned about shadowing and stuff like that. That's only to gauge interest. But if you know what to do and you want to go into medical school, then the biggest thing you can do in high school is to really focus on your grades. And what I mean by that is that you need to know exactly the best way you learn and integrate information. Because if you don't have the grades for it, the bottom line is that your application won't even be read. You can win a Nobel Prize, but if your GPA isn't at a certain cutoff, it doesn't matter what you've done, right? So the biggest safety net you need to do for yourself is your grades. And again, it all comes down to habits. Like when you're in class, are you paying attention? Are you taking notes? Do you understand the information? Because if you don't have these things from the get-go, it's going to be very difficult for you to succeed later on. When I was in high school, a misconception that I had was that, okay, maybe I'm not doing good in high school, I'll do really good in undergrad. And then I carried on. I didn't do good first year, okay, I'll do really good second year. That's not how it works, right? Like you can't make jumps. You have to start from somewhere, and if you don't start today, you're not going to start tomorrow. With regards to courses, the bottom line is that you don't have to take physics to get into a good undergrad or into a science program, but the advice that I give to everyone is that medicine is a science. The MCAT, which is one of the biggest struggles, is a science test. So it's good to have a foundation, and I really recommend taking these courses so you have that foundation, then you can do well. And in terms of what programs you guys should go to, there's no strict requirement that you have to do a Bachelor's of Science. I know someone who's done a Bachelor's in Music, and he's in my class. So you don't have to do a Bachelor's of Science or anything like that. But again, like I said before, it is a science. You have to have good understanding of basic foundations and principles. So it's really recommended you do a Bachelor's of Science or Health Sciences. And the last point, prestige, that's completely irrelevant. There's no such thing as prestige. Whether you go to any university, it depends on your grades. So I know the thing is that even though this may seem like common sense, but you'd be surprised like high school students talk and these things aren't in their minds. So forget prestige, it doesn't matter which undergrad you go to. Choose an undergrad that's close to home. If they're giving you a scholarship, even better. So focus on that. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we'll focus on the undergrads. Okay, so these are the keys to success that I think that you guys should think about in undergrad. And we'll talk each about these things, and the presenters later on will talk more in detail about these things. I'll just give an overview. So GPA is king. Choose activities based on your interests. Quality over quantity. CanMeds, which we'll talk a lot about. Research, and MCAT. So GPA is king. I can't stress this enough, that the current trend in medical school is that every single year, the entering average GPA is increasing year by year. For example, in my class, the average was 3.96, and it's out of 4.0. Like, that's the average. So your GPA has to be, like, your first and only priority. Because like I said before, people will tell you, okay, do this leadership role, that, and all that stuff. And that's really good, and that's very important. But if you don't have the GPA, all of that goes to waste. It does not matter what you have done if your GPA is not high. So you have to be strategic. So people say, yes, choose courses you are interested in, and I agree with that 100%, but not at the cost of your GPA. I'll share one anecdote with you guys. Ansar and I, we both went to life sciences together. We were both roommates for 4 years, and we had a student who was a very bright student, but he, I think in his later senior years, he chose an extremely hard course because he was interested in it. And that cost him his GPA, and that really hurt his chances in medical school. So when you choose your courses, you have to be strategic. Yes, choose courses you're interested in, but also find courses that have a good track record of people doing really well, right? Like you want to choose those courses instead. You have medical school to focus on your interests, but if you don't get into medical school, then what's the point, right? Again, organic chemistry. I know many of you guys mentioned that you guys are doing sciences. Organic chemistry, it's not a requirement to get into medical school. I believe. So, but if you do have to take organic chemistry or any other hard course for that matter, take it in summer school. Because in summer school, like what I didn't know going into undergrad was that even if you do extremely bad in summer school, it doesn't affect your GPA. Like the courses you take throughout the fall, winter term, those are the ones that matter. So choose courses which are very conducive to a high GPA during that year. And when you have the summer, that's when you guys can learn about organic chemistry, physics, or whatever you want, because then it won't harm you, and then you can actually focus on learning rather than the GPA itself. So in terms of applications and what you actually have to do, given that your GPA is high, is that your activities have to reflect the CanMed rules. So the CanMed rules, just to give a background to you all, it was a framework to basically evaluate physicians and the competencies and the qualities that an ideal physician should possess. So communicator, collaborator, manager, it's actually leader now, but health advocate, scholar, professional, and these same qualities are also used to assess medical school applicants. And so when you think about the activities that you want to do, they have to reflect this. And we'll talk about this later on in the later presentations. So in terms of activities, I'll use myself as an anecdote and kind of help you guys understand some of the things that you should be doing. That says quantity over quality, but it's actually the other way around. That's my fault. Quality over quantity. In the AMMAC, which is the portal used to apply to medical schools, there's 48 activities you can list. Answer will talk about this later, but you don't have to list all 48, but you have to choose the ones that really demonstrate longevity, demonstrate that you've been involved, commitment, and those things. And like I mentioned before, the CanMed rule have to be the framework for all those things. So for example, one of the CanMed rules was leadership, so I wrote my involvement with AMMAC. One of the CanMed rules was collaboration, so working in interdisciplinary teams, working with diverse populations, and that could be like working with Humanity First and stuff like that. And advocacy. So what advocacy means is really speaking for a group, speaking for a population. And I worked with MASQ, and that helped a lot. Right, so you see, this is all Jamaat work. This is not something special that you have to do. You don't have to be that involved in external things. Jamaat itself provides an amazing platform for you to do all your activities. Your guide sub's going to call you anyways. You might as well use that to your advantage, right? We have Million Pounds Food, Humanity First, Run for Bond. All these things can be put in your application, and it actually looks extremely good if you can write it in an external format. Okay, so MCAT. This is probably one of the biggest obstacles to admission. Does everyone know what the MCAT is? Generally? Okay. So the MCAT again is a test that assesses your ability of the foundational concepts in science. However, you also have to have a good understanding of research as well, which we'll talk about later. So for the undergrads, what I can tell you guys is focus on the MCAT right away. Don't wait for the summer to open the books, because the MCAT is a struggle, and the MCAT, you want to give yourself a lot of buffer to understand it. So what I learned later, which I wish someone told me, was that buy the books in first year, buy the books right now, whatever year you're in, just have the books on you. And as you're learning the material in your core classes, read the books as well. It's the same information, right? But what you can do is that you can write notes in the MCAT books, take some of the practice questions while you learn your courses. So you're always studying for the MCAT, because it's very hard to do well in the MCAT in a very condensed period of time. You want to stretch that period of time out as much as you can. And if you're studying for your courses anyways, you might as well put it in the context of the MCAT. One thing I can say for that you guys should do even tomorrow or tonight, if you guys are that dedicated, is focusing on the CARS section of the MCAT. CARS stands for it's the verbal section. So basically, you read passages on random literature, has nothing to do with science, and you answer questions on it. So it's more like a reading comprehension and stuff like that. Like that's one of the biggest. That's the hardest section to actually improve on. And the biggest issue is that because you guys are in the GTA, you guys are actually at a somewhat of a disadvantage, because schools will not give you any sort of favor based on your location. Like other schools, for example, let's look at Western. They'll have lower cutoffs for people in their area, whereas someone in the GTA, they'll have higher cutoffs. So you have to be not only excellent, but even excellent among the people who are excellent. And CARS is the hardest section to improve, but that's the most, some would say, highly weighted section in the whole MCAT. So really focus on CARS. For example, McMaster Med, I believe a third of the application is based off your verbal score, right? So this shows you the importance of the MCAT, and also the CARS section. And one thing that I really want to stress to all the undergrads is research, research, research. yes, it is true that you can get into medical school without doing any research. Yes, that's 100% true. Don't get me wrong, you can do that, and people have done that. But you also have to understand that as a physician, like the previous presenter mentioned, you're involved in lifelong learning, and your lifelong learning comes from reading primary literature, understanding the trends in medicine, and that comes from having a research background. And at any step of of your training, research is extremely fundamental and essential as well, and that reflects for you guys as well. So with research, my next point says publication is currency. Now, publications, you need to understand that you don't have to do a phenomenal job curing cancer, stuff like that. You can do small things that show that you have completed a project. That's the most important thing. You could do 10 research projects with a prof or whatever, but if there's no outcome, there's no sort of metric of completion, it won't look as good as having something you can say that, okay, I worked on this project for a year and I got published in this. And again, it can be a university journal, it can be anything you want. It doesn't have to be Nature or Science or anything like that. Something small, but shows that you were committed to it as well. And I know that for research itself, because you guys are undergrads, it's a big likelihood that you may be taken advantage of. So really choose your supervisor carefully, someone who will mentor you, someone who will give you authorship on their papers, and not someone who will just use you for free labor. Because I think that's a really big trap that's unfortunate, but it has happened. So really be careful with that. And again, don't focus on too many things. Choose one project and really do good at it. Just focus on that. Don't worry about anything else. And again, just complete it. And also, the more you work with one person on one project, you build relationships with that person, and you get letters of reference. For the applications, you're allowed 3 reference letters. And it does not matter who that person is or what their status is. You need to have a professional relationship with them, and they need to really write good things about you and your qualities. And the last thing on this slide is Scholar. I mentioned the CanMed framework. One of the elements of that framework is a Scholar framework, and research falls under that. So make sure you guys, please, really get involved in research. It's not essential, but you want to boost your chances as much as possible. So this is just an idea of kind of what you need to be doing per year. So the first year, I would really suggest that in the academic year, don't worry about extracurriculars and whatnot. Focus on your GPA. Because I'll give you guys an example. When you're in your 3rd year, you're going to be applying to medical school, but your 3rd year marks aren't the one that's going to count. It's going to be your 1st and 2nd year, right? So if your 1st year GPA is a 3.5 and your 2nd year GPA is a 4.0, your GPA on the application is 3.75. You don't meet the cutoffs. You know what I mean? So you can do amazing later on in your senior years, but if your 1st year is very low, it's going to drag you down. You're going to end up doing a 5th year, a master's, to really just fix that 1 year, right? So that 1st year of university is so critical that you just focus on that. Because you have the summer, like getting into medical school is a long game. It's not a short run, like you have to get in within your 1st year. You have 4 or 5 years to get in. So take advantage of your summers. Everything you need to do for the activities, the leadership, the research, you can do in the summer. And that's actually better for you, to be honest with you. You have 4 months off, be productive in the summers. I also, just to give, I'm not sure what everyone's GPA is, but also know that some medical schools, they also look at your last 2 years of your GPA as well. So don't be frightened if your 1st year wasn't that great. Mine wasn't that great at all. So don't worry about that. But it does help you, and it will really save you a lot of time. And again, like I mentioned before, take your time and really trust the process. When I was in 1st year, a physician told me that don't rush the medical school process, and I didn't listen to him. Right, like I did so many different things in 1st year. I put my hand in so many different projects, and it did hurt me at the end. At the end of 1st year. So take your time, even if it takes you 4 years, 5 years, even 6 years, it's totally fine. Because once you get into medical school, what happened in the past, it's completely irrelevant, and there's so much to look forward to. There's people in my class who finished PhDs. There's someone who did law school, then did med school. He's like 35, and it's all worth it. So don't worry about getting in your 3rd year. Like don't make your timeline so compressed that you put so much pressure on yourself to get into 3rd year, because while it is amazing to get in, but it's not the end of the world. Even if you don't get into 4th year, it's not the end of the world. It just matters if you get in some point along your journey, and everything else will be worth it when you get in, inshallah. So that's my part. And again, we'll give you guys our email address. You can contact me or any of the presenters.
Okay, I think I'm talking next. So my name is Maham, like I mentioned earlier, and I am I just finished my first year at U of T at the medical school. I did my undergrad at Western University, so I was in London for about 4 years, and then I applied at the end of my first year, and alhamdulillah, I got admission after my first attempt into various medical schools across Canada, and obviously U of T is number one, and it was close to home, so I chose U of T. Also, as I'm talking, I'm just getting over a cold, so excuse me if I need to take a drink of water or clear my throat. But okay, I'm going to go over a lot of the things that Kuzar has mentioned, but just maybe additional tips, and also going to try to figure out what I need to do to go next. Okay, I'm going to guess it's this button. Okay, so first of all, what is the MCAT? I know he talked about it a little bit, but just to kind of break it down a little bit more. So there's 4 main sections on the MCAT. So there's biological and biochemical foundations. The next one is chemical and physical foundations. And then we have a third section, which is psychology, sociology. Those are basically the 2 main areas that you need to focus on for the third one. And the last one is the notorious dreaded CARS, critical analysis and reasoning skills section. And so for the first one, biology and biochemical foundations, really you need to have an understanding of biology, physiology, and for when I was doing it, there was a really heavy emphasis on biochemistry as well. The second section is a lot of physics, a lot of physical chemistry, materials chemistry, organic chemistry, and I think they also put in some biochemistry in there as well. And the last section is a lot of introductory, like if you guys have taken first year psychology or any introductory psychology courses, it's a lot of first year psychs and soc. And the last one, CARS, honestly, it's an enigma. I still don't even understand how I did it or what I did. And it's a really, really tough thing to study for, I thought. I've just found it really challenging because the way that you study for it is really different than perhaps how you're used to studying in high school and in university. But I'll talk about study tips and stuff coming forward. So the 4 test sections, each of them you get independent scores, when you get your MCAT marks back. And so 125 is kind of the average score, and for some universities, for U of T, that is the cutoff score. If you get below 125, most people don't bother applying because they know that that's a requirement. But usually, if you're thinking of applying to a lot of out-of-province schools, or if you're, because I mentioned, if you're you want to apply to Western but you're not from the London area, it's good to have a score that's a little bit higher. So for each section you get a score, and then they kind of get aggregated to give you a cumulative score that can range between 472 and 528. And then with 500 being kind of okay, this is the average, the minimum you should get if you want to think about med school and applying with this MCAT score. Okay, so how do you prep for it? So again, I think it's really, really helpful if you take courses to help. So yeah, alhamdulillah, a lot of you guys are already in sciencey degrees or pursuing sciencey degrees. So I'm sure you guys have already taken a physics course, and you want to make sure that you want to take at least physical chemistry or biology course, physiology course if you can fit it in, biochem or an organic chemistry if you want to take it or not, and think you're going to do okay in it, in an introductory psychology course, because I feel if you're the kind of person who really needs a teacher or someone to be giving lectures and then you go back and listen to that, that is something that I really value. You need to have learned it in school. It's really tough to learn all of this, and look at how many courses I mentioned, and that's not even covering all of the MCAT. So it's really, really tough to do if you don't have a foundation in some of these courses already. Okay, so for CARS, honestly, I don't know what to say because it's tough, and I feel it's just it's a hard thing to teach how to study for. So I think the best thing that you can do, and the thing that I really think helped me, is working on improving my reading speed. So I've been reading since I was really, really young, and I didn't realize it, but when your parents tell you read more books and read more books, I was okay, I'm just learning, I'm reading fiction and learning stories, it's not gonna help me. And then when I was prepping for cars with a few of my friends, I realized I could read a lot quicker than they could just because I'd read a lot my entire life. So even if you haven't read a lot or you don't like reading, reading anything, like things that interest you, things that may be outside of what you're used to reading, so maybe read some philosophy passages, some arts and humanities passages, some psych passages, like a lot of things that you aren't really introduced to if you're doing a science degree. I think it really helps because all the passages are sort of related to like humanities and arts and social sciences, and they're not very like it's not like a scientific literature review or like a scientific paper that you're reading. So I think all of that. So if you can improve reading speed, because a lot of the passages are quite lengthy, and so if you're like spending all your time just trying to at least get through it, you won't have enough time to actually read the questions, think about them a little bit, because even some of the questions are quite kind of tricky. And you have to read them a few times, and you have to go back to the passage and say, okay, like, where do I read this, and try to figure that out. So all of that takes time. And I thought that for me, like, in cars, time was the biggest thing, right? Like, because I could read quick, I could do the comprehension questions quicker. So read as much as you can in your free time, things that you like to do, and don't think of it as like, okay, like a chore. Read fun things, and that still will help, I think, with increasing reading speed. And the last point is being able to interpret and analyze. And I thought that this is a prevalent theme throughout the MCAT. So I thought very little of it, maybe parts of the biology and the biochemistry sections were like just plug and chug or just memorize and you already know it. But a lot of it was like they'll give you a passage, or they'll give you like a few paragraphs, and you have to read through them, and they might be like study results, or it might be like a graph. And you're going to have to interpret, okay, like what information can I get out of this graph, and what does this tell me about what message they're trying to get across. So being able to find like the main idea or the main point of essays or of reading paragraphs, and then being able to analyze and interpret like data. Especially in the psych and social sections, I thought that was a lot of it. Like they literally just give you graphs and tell you, okay, like what are some of the things that you can interpret from the graph. So I know you guys, like this is a lot to ask, but if you can start reading like really basic scientific literature articles and just go to where it says data and see if you can figure out like, okay, what like main point are they trying to get across just from the tables. I think it'll be quite helpful in more than one section. Okay. Okay, so courses and books. So I get a lot of questions from pre-meds about like whether it's necessary to take a Princeton Review or Kaplan course to prep, and I'm going to say absolutely not. I think if you've taken the courses already in school, and you are someone who's able to like push yourself and work hard and can work a little bit independently during the summers, and you have the time to do so, I think it's 100% doable. Like I never took a course and I like did great on the MCAT and I only did it once. So I like there's like I feel there's a lot of people were talking about you can't really do well if you don't take a course. But I realized that courses are expensive and they're time consuming. If you want to do other things in the summer, they're also not the most fun things to be doing with your time. So you don't have to take a course. But you do 100% need to be diligent with how you study. Like you need to have a schedule. You need to say, okay, like, you know, my summer is 3.5 months long. And like every week, so the way I did it is every week I have a goal and I'd say, okay, I need to get like these 3 sections. Like I need to do 1 section in physics and 1 section from the chemistry section and 1 section from biology and make sure that I'm done by the end of the week. And the other thing is MCAT practice tests. So this I learned later on as well, is like you have to do the practice test really early on. So I did my first practice test, and don't do this, like 2.5 weeks before I wrote my MCAT, my first one. And that's like, alhamdulillah, like God was with me that I did well on the MCAT. But like you really, really need to make sure that you do a practice test early on. I would say even like 6 to 8 weeks before your MCAT, do your first practice test. And I think it can be really intimidating because you're like, wow, this score is going to decide whether or not I do well on the MCAT. But it's like I think the first practice I did 2.5 weeks before, my score like, on average was like on 50th percentile, right? So you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you're doing it early on so that you know where you kind of stand. And also, so you kind of get an idea of the kinds of questions, right? So if you have an idea of the kind of questions that are being asked, like, okay, I know that a lot of the questions that are being asked are asking me to analyze, and I haven't really worked in my analysis skills. You know where to direct your studying. Or if you finish it and you do the full test and you say, okay, I did really well on the physics and the biology sections, but my cars and psych and social sections were really crap. So what do? Okay, I need to go back and figure out how to make that better. So I think, yeah, do practice tests really early. If you Google MCAT practice tests, there are at least 7 to 8 that are free, because there's so many companies that want to get in the business that they let you get your first one free. So at least 7 to 8 of them are going to be free. So do all of those. And then when you buy the books, along with the books, you get practice tests as well. So do all of those practice tests. And then the AAMC, which is the organization that makes the MCAT, also has practice tests, and make sure that you do those you do those for sure, and those are going to be the most reflective of your actual score. So, those are going to give you the best idea of like whether or not you're going to do well and what stage you're in. So do all of those if you can. So studying for the MCAT and writing the MCAT, I think it's best to do in the summer. Again, yeah, you can totally study for it as you go, but again, I can understand like undergrad is tough and like you have so many other things going on. I think it's best to do it in the summer. And I also think it's best doing it in the summer that's early on, because obviously you want to give yourself time if you don't do so well to be able to retake the MCAT maybe the next summer or maybe the winter holidays, whenever you'd like. So I did my MCAT the summer after my second year, and I think that's a good time because by then you've gotten all the foundation courses and you still have another summer, like the summer after third year, to be able to redo it if you'd like. I also get asked about working or volunteering while studying for the MCAT. And to that I'm going to say 100% doable as well. I worked full-time while I was studying for the MCAT, and it was really, it was tough, and during Ramadan it gets especially tough. But I don't think you have to work full-time, but maybe once a week if you want to do something to volunteer, or you want to do another thing that's going to help you with your application, I think it's totally doable. I don't think, and I also think it's it's pretty unhealthy just be inside the entire summer and only studying, and you're gonna get sad. So I think if you wanna maybe work part-time if you think it's doable, or you wanna volunteer a few days a week, I totally think you should. And when I was working, working was the best part of my day, and I'd go home and study. So I think even just boosting your mood and morale, I don't know, it helped for me. But obviously you know yourself best. If you think you're not gonna be able to do it, you don't have to. But I just think it's really possible if you want to be that ambitious, I guess. So again, like I said, aim for a score of at least 125 in all sections. U of T, that's the cutoff. But I think ideally 127. So OOP means out of province. If you want to apply to out of province schools or schools like Western that place a really heavy emphasis on the MCAT. So this is just a breakdown. This is not to scare you guys. This is just a breakdown of each school and what minimum MCAT scores they're required. And some of them I've put an asterisk beside because their requirements for if you're not within that region are quite different than their requirements for if you are in that region. So for U of T, yeah, you need a 125 on each section. For UBC, if you're out of province, then you need a 124 on each section. McMaster doesn't release because it differs by each cycle. Queen's also differs by each cycle. And there are also some schools like Nossum and Ottawa where the MCAT is not required. So let's say you do your MCAT and summer after, maybe you decide to do summer after third year, and it didn't go so well. I don't think you have to say, okay, that's it, I'm not going to get into medical school. I say 100% apply to the medical schools that either place a low emphasis on the MCAT or don't require it at all. So I would 100% still encourage you to apply to Ottawa. McMaster only cares mostly about cars. If you did okay on cars but didn't do so well on the rest, I would still 100% say apply to McMaster. So you don't have to, I think, forego an entire application cycle if you didn't do so well on the MCAT as you would have liked. Okay. So this is like, I'm sure you guys will have the presentation later. You guys can go through this and if this is of interest to you at all later on. Okay, awards and scholarships. So I'm going to talk about all the extracurricular stuff because I think it's really important. Like secondary to GPA, I think it's kind of the most important thing. Start thinking about awards and scholarships early on and apply to as many as possible. Like I can't tell you how many times I've heard like guidance counselors or career counselors talk about like scholarships that are available within the university that haven't been given out because no one applied to them. So make sure that 110%, like anything that you're like, okay, this could remotely fit me or the kind of person that they're looking for could be me. I think it's worth putting the effort in and it looks really great on your application. You really stand out if you have scholarships or awards. So there's a lot of school-specific awards. I'm going to mention some of them in my next slide, but a lot of awards, okay, first of all, are given on academic achievement. I'm trying to think back, in my early years of university, like the awards I got were all based on academic achievement, right? So if you have a really good GPA and it's better than other people in your faculty will be really generous, I hope, and will, you'll get an email and they'll say, okay, like you did well, so we want to offer you an award just so you continue doing well. So again, if you focus on your GPA, like Kizar mentioned, those awards and scholarships, some of them you just don't even have to apply for. Like the faculty knows you and they'll contact you. There's a lot of research awards to apply to. So when I first heard about NSERC, I don't know, do you guys know what NSERC is? It's basically a regulatory body for research in Canada, I think. But they have a lot of potential, and there's a lot of potential for awards for undergrad students. So they have this thing called the USRA, which is the Undergraduate Student Research Award, and you apply to it yourself with a faculty member. This is also if you're interested in research, and then you get this research award, and like you get money to do research. So I got that like in my last year. It was like it's fine. It's like you just do research with a faculty member that you've chosen, which is really sweet. And the faculty member doesn't have to pay for you, right? Because the award is paying for you, so they really like you. So it's a good thing to look into if you're interested in research. And also don't be intimidated. Like a lot of the times, like the application process or like how intense it looks is really intimidating, and you're like, okay, I don't want to start this because this seems like too much. But I think I would just encourage you to like really believe in yourself and apply to a lot of these awards. Sick Kids of the Summer Research Award. Actually, every main downtown hospital, I think St. Mike's has a Keenan Summer Research Program. Sunnybrook has a Brain Sciences Research Program. CIHR is another regulatory body for research that have research programs. So just type in the name of the organization and like summer research, and like a million awards are gonna pop up. Or just type in like Toronto Summer Research, and there's going to be so many awards. And I would encourage you, if you're thinking about research, to apply to these awards. And to start thinking about them early. So if you're thinking about a summer award, don't start looking in April. Start looking in October, because a lot of times the applications are due in December for the next summer. So start looking early and thinking about what you want to do in the summer, because that's quite important. You can also go to your financial aid office. At Western, we have the wonderful Student Success Center, and if you're doing undergrad at Western, and they really, really support students in finding research and scholarships. Like, I think that's really, really important. And also speak to your mentors. If you know people in upper year, if you know people who are in medical school, if you really like a professor, if you went to and you talked to a guidance, people in high school, I think you have guidance counselors. If you really like a guidance counselor or a teacher, go and talk to them about it and be like, I'm really interested in applying to awards and scholarships, but I just don't know about anything. Like, I don't know what opportunities there are for me. And I'm sure they're going to have a big list of awards and scholarships that you never even heard of that they can direct you towards. And also this I learned about really late. The last point is applying for scholarships and awards from Jamaat. But if you go to talim.ca/scholarships, there are a lot of scholarships available for both Lajna and Khadam from Jamaat. So I think that's a great opportunity to avail it if you can. Okay, leadership and volunteering. So going back to leadership and the CanMed roles. So leadership is a really big CanMed role. I know it's manager, they're like leader now. So I think the good thing you can do is seeking out leadership opportunities really, really early on. So starting in high school if you want to, or if you think you can handle it, but definitely in the first year of university. And by that I mean like you don't need to be like president of the student council in first year, but I think if you make sure that you get involved in a club. And then the third point, which is long-term commitment, stay with that club or organization for more than just half a year or 1 year. Stay with them throughout your 4 years. And I guarantee you that you're going to move. So you're going to move from being a club member to then, maybe an executive to a vice president to president. And that's how you get positions in university, right? In clubs and stuff. Is like get involved through whatever entry, position, even if you're just being a member and attending meetings, just so you have an idea of what it's like. And then, when call goes out for executive positions, apply. Like, even if you're like, okay, I don't know if I have the expertise, no one has the expertise. Everyone just like gets into the role and they learn. So I think you should apply to leadership positions for sure. And it's really, really important, I think, for when you want to stand out amongst applicants in medical school. Don't be afraid to start a new initiative. So if there's anything that you guys are really interested in, like, let's say I'm really interested in helping out with the Canadian Blood Services, and there's nothing about that at my university. There isn't a club, there isn't an organization, but I've worked with them in high school, or I want to work with them now. I think starting a new club or initiative or idea is really, really great. It can seem really daunting, but again, if you speak to guidance counselors, speak to Success Center people, speak to upper year students, I'm sure they can direct you on how best to start. So I think that's a good thing to think about as well, if that's something that you want to do. And then when you're thinking about and reflecting on your leadership opportunities, really be able to define your role. Be able to say, okay, this is what my role was. These are all the things that I was responsible for. And this is the impact that I made because of this role. And I think the only way that you're going to be able to do that is if you're really, truly interested in and passionate about what you're doing. So I know we talked about earlier about like getting involved in medically related things, but I just don't think that's necessary at all. Like I think if you find something, like I can't remember like what I did except for research that was even, close to medically related. Like a lot of things I did were just charity work or leadership work. It was really different from medicine. And I think it really did help me stand out as an applicant, right? Like if I've only done medically related work, I think it could be for your benefit, or maybe depending on like the kind of person you are and if you are really truly like passionate about it. So don't be afraid to do things that are more your interest, but that don't seem to directly relate to medicine. Because as long as you can talk about it in a way that makes you seem really passionate and makes you seem like, okay, yeah, you clearly had an impact on other people or in your community, I think that is always worth it. And it always will look really good when you are in the interview and application stage. Okay, so these are some examples of leadership and volunteer positions that I talked to medical students. So being involved in or magazine is really good. Being an executive member of a club. If you have any mentor-mentee programs with high school students, being involved in a teaching role or a mentor role is really good as well. If you are interested in doing some local or national or even international community service work, leading the trip and stuff, just being part of the trip, I think would be something to look for. If you're interested in being part of your university student council, if you're into sports and you want to be a soccer coach, if you're into music and you want to play in your university's orchestra, like all of those things are really important. So these are all the things that, obviously I've done every single one of them, and this is why I'm in medical school. But I have not. I've only done one of those. So the other thing I think was like when I was an undergrad and I was thinking about medical school and medical students, I thought like you had to do like everything. Like you had to be the president of 5 clubs and you had to be like editor-in-chief of 5 journals. And so I think that's a misconception, and like medical school and medical students are really mystified like when you're a young undergrad. So I think what's important to remember is like as long as you focus on your grade and MCAT and make an effort, like make a genuine effort to get involved in extracurricular and leadership opportunities, I think it'll show in your application, and you like definitely don't need to burn yourself out or do everything under the sun. Just pick what you like and stick with it. And I think that'll really help you along the way. Employment, so if you're interested in spending your summers doing that, you could like be employed in anything. I think as long as you can talk about like your roles, your responsibilities, the kind of skills you learn. So a lot of people like work retail. So there's so much that you can learn from working retail, right? Like you can learn patience, you can learn organization, teamwork, working with people, working with angry people. So I think a lot of it you can spin in a way that makes you look like someone who's had an experience that's been really valuable, and I'm sure it has. So a lot of times, like most people, like during my summers, most of my employment was in research, but it definitely doesn't need to be. Even though the research experience is quite valuable, but if you don't want to spend every summer doing research, even whatever employment that interests you is good, and it's good to discuss in applications and interview as well. Okay, mentorship. So I added this slide in from last year because I saw that there wasn't one from last year, and like mentorship has been absolutely invaluable to my journey to medical school. I like almost 50%, I'd say maybe 80% of the reason that I'm in medical school is because of mentorship. So it's so important, right? So when I was in first year, and I guess most of second year as well, I was really clueless. Like I had no idea what kind of things to do. I didn't have anyone in my family who's in medicine. I didn't even have a great cousin who's like related to anything in medicine. I just knew, okay, this is something that I want to do. And that's what I did. The first few years, because I was so clueless, I tried to find mentors. And alhamdulillah, like by the grace of God, I found really incredible people. So mentors could be literally it could be anyone, right? So it could be an FA student, it could be someone who's already in medical school but doesn't have to be. My mentors, the first mentor I had was in the Student Success Center, there was just this lady who worked with high achieving students. And I just like emailed her one time and I'm like, I know you work with like high achieving students, and I really want to like talk to you about what I can do, because that sounds like me. That sounds like me. Like I'm a high achieving person. And so I went and I met with her, and I met with her twice, and I met with her 3 times, and then we had every 2 weeks I'd go and see her, and every time I'd go and see her, she would have a new award or a scholarship or an opportunity for me that I would never ever have gotten if she hadn't searched for it for me. So I assure you that your university's like Success Center or like Student Center has people like that, which like their entire job is to help out students seek opportunities. So go like make an appointment with them. Like she nominated me for 3 awards that I got, and I would like 100% would never have had that if she hadn't known me and if she hadn't nominated me. The second person, I think another place to look for mentors is in research. So if like this can, and I know getting into research is so difficult, like getting your first research experience is so difficult, but go on the website of researchers in your school. I mean, find a doctor or find a professor who's doing really cool research, and it doesn't have to be related to healthcare, just like cool research, and you want to get involved in it, just talk to them about it. And set up an appointment, say I want to volunteer in your research lab, and send them an email. And usually when I would send an email, I would send my transcript with them because I knew that that's the only way that they're going to say, okay, this person's driven. Is if they see my grades and say, okay, like she has good grades, so I'll accept her in my lab. So for me, like my mentor who, like I did 2 summers of research and then my thesis project with her, she like wrote my reference letter. Actually, all my mentors are the ones that wrote my reference letter. She told me to apply for NSERC, for CIHR award, like all of those other opportunities and things that made me stand out as an applicant that would never have happened if I hadn't like met with her and asked her to be part of her research lab. So all of those things, and I think even generally like support, like the last year of medical, not last year of medical school, last year of undergraduate was really trying for me, right? Because I was trying to finish my thesis project. I still had courses to do. I was flying, East Coast, West Coast, trying to do interviews alone. So I think it's also really helpful if you know someone and they know what you're going through. So I think all of those things, yeah.
If you could just wrap up your next slide because it's exactly 2 o'clock.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So this is my last slide. So the last thing is to remember is to work hard, play hard, and pray hard. And I can tell you, I did the first and last, but I forgot to do the one in the middle. So make sure that you are taking time for yourself and doing things that you enjoy, but you're also working really hard, and obviously you have trust in God and you're praying hard as well. And that's it.
All right, good place to stop because we have to pray now. Maham, there's no reason to rush because you can just finish them when we get started. So everyone can please head over for Zohar prayers, and then we'll be meeting right back here after prayers. We're not done yet, okay? Assalamu alaikum. All right, I think almost everyone is back.
Do you want me to take a piece? Because you guys are
Sure. So we're going to get started. And I'm going to give it the microphone to Ansar, who's going to finish the presentation about applying to medical school. Sorry, what was that? Just hold the microphone close.
Okay. Alright, so Assalamu alaikum. As Kashif Bhai just mentioned, my name is Ansar Dawood. I will be starting medical school at the University of Toronto in just about 6 weeks. It won't be my first time starting medical school because I actually started last year in the States and I completed about a semester and a half. So I'm in a bit of a weird position where on one hand I've already started school, but on the other hand I've also just finished an application cycle. First of all, I just want to thank Kashif Bhai for joining. I was just thinking while I was sitting here that I've attended so many of these meetings in the past for like 3 or 4 years now, and so it's definitely an honor to be able to pass some of the things that I've learned forward now. And basically what I'm going to be talking about in my portion of the presentation is my colleagues before me have talked a lot about what you need to be a good applicant, the things you have to do over the years, MCAT, GPA being the two biggest things. But even if you have a perfect MCAT score, and if you have a perfect, you have the 100th percentile, and you have a 4.0 GPA, no one's going to come to your door and say that here's a seat for medical school. You still have to figure out a way to piece together your application and figure out how you can translate everything you've done over 4 or 5 or even more years potentially and come across as someone that a medical school would want to have in their school. And there's really an art to that, and that's what I will be focusing on. So just a slide, just some numbers, 22,000 applicants in Ontario for just under 1,000 seats. So it's a very low acceptance rate, and believe me, there are people who have 4.0s and 100th percentile MCATs who don't get it, people who have 4 or 5 interviews and they get waitlisted everywhere. So next slide. So this is the goal, this is what we want to end up with. This was actually my letter that I got a couple of weeks ago from U of T, and it's, Khizr and Maham I'm sure got this a year ago. This is one of the things that you work so hard towards for so many years, and I thought this might be a little bit of inspiration for some of the younger ones among us today. Next slide. So just to recap, some of the things that we talked about, and I'm not going to be talking in detail about any one of these things, were the things that you need: GPA, MCAT, reference letters, research, awards, leadership, volunteer employment, and extracurriculars. And I believe Khizr already talked a little bit about the timeline where you're starting in first year, you want to focus on your coursework, you want to bring up your marks. Over the years, you're going to start slowly adding things in one by one, whether it's clinical experience, research. You're going to start preparing for your MCAT. And then once you've completed all those things, then you have to put together your application. Just one comment I wanted to reiterate from what someone said earlier, in terms of the timeline. Again, I want to emphasize that again too, especially to the younger ones among us. Don't force yourself to rush and squeeze everything into 3 years. This was already said, but I feel like if you're not able to manage everything, if you're finding that in the same summer you're throwing in organic chemistry, you're throwing in biochemistry courses, then you're trying to study for the MCAT, and you're working full time, just because you want to get in after 3 years, that's not always going to be the best idea. That could actually work against you, because the more bad MCAT scores you have, or the more courses that you have with low grades in them, the worse, the harder it's going to be for you to really get in. And if you think about it, it's not just 4 more years of medical school. You're going to be studying, if you count from start to finish, sometimes 25 to 30 years. So if you're studying for 25 years and you after medical school, there was just a conversation here because once you get into medical school, it's not over. You're trying to get into the residency you want, and then after that, you're competing for fellowships, and then you're competing for jobs, and then you want to work your way up there too. So if it's 25 years, 1 year really isn't going to make a difference because medicine really is, and it's overused, but it is a lifelong learning experience. So next slide. Talking about the actual application, there are different options, and I don't know, if everyone's goal is here is Ontario. I will be, as Kashyap mentioned, focusing specifically on Canada and Ontario, but I will touch a little bit about just to give some context about some of the other applications as well. So next slide. So the Ontario Medical School application service or system is called ONSAS. And that's a central application for all the medical schools in Ontario. And then some of the other application systems, for example, in the United States, there's AMCAS, the American Medical College Application System. ACOMAS and AUSTRAC is just another example. That's Oz is for Aussies or Australian. If you thought about applying there, you would go through them. So let's talk about a little bit more about ONSAS on the next slide. So basically, this is what the ONSAS application looks like, and each of us have completed this to be able to go to U of T. You can see here, it might be a little small, so I'll read it to you. Basically, this application will contain your personal information, your biographical data, your school selections, which of the schools in Ontario do you want to apply to. So Khizr and Mahan touched a bit about the requirements of the different schools. Some, for example, McMaster only looks at the CARS section of your MCAT. And if your CARS section is your weakest section, maybe you don't want to spend that $150 and apply there. So thinking about what schools you want to apply to, it's always good to talk to someone who has been through the process and who can sort of help you with that. Then there's the autobiographical sketch. And that is basically 48 entries where you have to basically summarize and capture all of your extracurricular research, employment activities not just over the past 4 years, but even before that. You can even start in high school. I think it's starting from age 16 and onwards. You can include anything in there. And I will be showing you an example of what the activity looks like. Below here is just the AMCAS application, so I just wanted to point out that the central applications are similar. This would be called a primary application, and it would have information about the schools you want to apply to, your coursework, your transcripts. That you would also submit your letters of reference through the central application, through the ONSAS application in the case of Ontario. Okay, so next slide. Sorry, let me just quickly go over the timeline. So basically, this is how the timeline will work. So if you're applying for next year, you have to complete your application by pretty much October 2nd or 1st sometimes of that year. So let's say that you are starting third year and you want to basically start medical school after your third year of medical school, which is the earliest you can do it. You would be applying in September of third year. And you would be finishing your application by October 2nd of your third year. So if you're submitting your application by October of your third year, you just started your third year, and your third year marks aren't included in that. So just something to be conscious of. If you're thinking about applying after 4 years, you don't actually have that fourth year in your application. So everything you want to do, everything you want to sort of present to the medical schools, you have to have that before the year of your application. Okay, and then so pretty much the last date to write the MCAT, ONSAS would have to receive your scores by November 1st. So again, most people write it over the summer, and you would probably want to write it before school starts. So let's say that you finish a year, you finish in May. You have May, June, July, August to start studying. Take the MCAT, potentially take it again if one of your sections was below the cutoffs, and then you're going to apply. And using those scores, and your scores pretty much take 30 days to come out. So for those of you who haven't written the MCAT before, you write the MCAT and then your score actually comes out a month after you finish. So in this case, if the last date for the application is October 2nd, you also have to have your MCAT written before then, and your scores have to be received by November 1st. And then I guess starting in January is when you would start getting emails about interviews. And then you would go through that interview process. It can last all the way from February until March, April even, in some cases. And then May 8th is when the first round of offers are sent out in Ontario. The date can change by 1 or 2 days every year, but it is one day where all the offers are sent out, and it's a pretty big day for pre-meds every year. Next slide. Okay, so I'm not going to go too much into the CanMeds roles because both of the presenters before me did talk about it, but it is also important to be conscious that every school does have slightly different requirements, slightly different values. In Canada, it's in Ontario, they are more or less aligned because of the CanMeds competencies. If you're thinking about applying elsewhere, you would want to look a little bit more into detail about that specific school's requirements. Here is actually something that U of T uses as their criteria to judge their applicants. So if you look here, they have 4 clusters: professional, communicator, collaborator, manager, advocate, and scholar. And although this might look like U of T has something separate, from all the other schools, if you look at those words, professional, communicator, collaborator, manager, advocate, and scholar, if we go to the next slide, those are pretty much the exact same words from the CanMeds competencies. They're just organized in a different way. And so basically what U of T will do is they'll use those 4 clusters to assess every part of your application. So your autobiographical sketch, which I'm going to again give you some more examples of your activities that you've done over the past few years, they're going to basically use these to judge those. Your reference letters, they're going to try to pick up on these qualities and see how competent you are in each one of them. Okay, next slide. So here, I thought instead of showing a lot of text from my actual application, I wanted to share some pictures of the things we did in undergrad, because you mentioned that we did go to undergrad together at McMaster. So the first picture is just an intramurals tournament that we played in, Division I champions. We did a lot of actually Humanity First and AMSA work while we were in undergrad. So at the top, we actually raised over $5,000 to build a water well, and that's something that we were also pretty proud of, and we put it on our application. It's sponsored by the Humanity First Student Club at McMaster. It's built in Africa. We did a lot of Feed the Homeless events. I got an award when I graduated, which was called the Burke Ring for outstanding contributions to the community because of the Humanity First work that we did. And so I think when you sit down, if you sit down to write your application the week before it's due, you might not be able to recall a lot of the things that you've done over the years. And a lot of times there's simple things that they don't always all have to look, like major accomplishments like this. If you go to the next slide, here are some examples of even simple things that people don't realize that medical schools actually do value, because it shows that you fulfill those CanMeds clusters. So here's an example. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, has Parkinson's. And so I actually put that on my application where I wrote that, and my other grandfather actually, my dad's father had a stroke a few months ago, and that was something I talked about in my interviews. You don't have to talk about the traditional, I've been in a research lab doing research for 4 years. If they ask you a question about problem solving, if they ask you a question about, that they want to see your personality, you can use personal experiences, things that have happened in your life, challenges that you've had to overcome, and that's actually going to, I would say, make you more unique than all the other applicants. But with that said, it is still important to have those basic things, have a little bit of research, have, be involved in clubs, and things like that. So another experience that I put, the top 2 examples are actually from my OMSAS application. So that one, I was a teaching assistant in undergrad, and I basically wrote that I led tutorial discussions, helped students, graded things, assisted the faculty, things like that. Here's a different example of an application. So some applications will actually ask for, so OMSAS is pretty much, their description is pretty much a tweet, or less than a tweet even. They want 1 sentence, and that's all you get to say about that activity. Other applications, for example, if you apply to the West Coast, some other schools that don't have a central application, or if you apply to America, so this was just an example from AMMAC online that I found, they want like a paragraph description. And this was, I thought, a pretty good example. They said that, shadowing has been a very satisfying experience for me. I learned about this, and this, multi-system cancers, for example. My experience allowed me to build relationships with my patients. I saw the consultation, diagnosis, treatment process. I learned these ethical issues, I learned whatever, and then I've also gained a lot of mentorship from whoever this doctor is. So it's a pretty well-rounded response. It shows what your responsibilities were, what you were involved in, and also the most important thing that people leave out is what you learned or how it shaped you as a person, as an applicant, and basically that's what's going to show whether you'll make a good physician or not. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is in AMSAS. These are basically the categories that you have to fill up. I mentioned there's 48 spots. So you want to, basically my suggestion would be starting now, regardless of whether you're in high school or you're in undergrad, keep a running log. Anytime you think of something, have your mind, maybe set some checkpoints for yourself every couple of months. You want to open up this log and add in the things that you've been involved in. This is going to make it a lot easier for you, and you'll be able to actually strategize when you sit down to write your application and pick the most important things, or the things that show you as the most competent or the best person for to be admitted in medical school. So formal education, employment, volunteer activities, extracurricular activities. So the difference there would be volunteers, actually you're serving the community, for example, feeding the homeless. Extracurricular would be sports, things like that, awards, accomplishments, research, and anything that doesn't fit in those categories. For example, I even put that I traveled to an international peace conference in the UK when I went to Jalsa, and that was something that people might not have that on their application. So it's about how you think of things and how you frame them that can really make your application stand out. Next slide. References. So again, this was, I believe, already touched on, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. And for AMSAS, you do need 3 references. Again, the important thing is to pick people that know you well. You don't have to pick the department head of a given hospital who has all these credentials. I don't think the universities actually have any sort of metric for how big the person behind your letter is. I don't think that's the case. I think it's more about the quality of the letter. So even if you can get someone who knows you a lot better, knows you for a longer period of time, even if they're just a counselor or if they're a physician that you've shadowed for an extended period of time, their letter, which says a lot more about you, would be a lot more beneficial to your application. Sometimes applications do have requirements for what type of references you need. So some will say that you have to have 1 academic, 1 medical, and 1 volunteer letter, for example. I don't think that's the case for Ontario, but I think in any case, if you have that sort of a good mix between your references, it'll definitely help you out. Okay. Research supervisor are also good to have. Coaches. Again, the key for getting good references, I would say, if you don't know a lot of people, all of us are involved in Jamaat in one way or the other. You can always look towards the Jamaat, but also in terms of building relationships with professors, you have to start early. One of the things I did was I sort of started thinking about it a year ahead, and I was staying in regular contact with my mentors. You can't just show up the 2 weeks before your application's due or a week before your application's due. Most professors can't even do it in that short period of a time span. Check in with them. Regularly meet them, tell them about your progress. Apart from whatever work you're doing for them, just regularly touch base with them. Tell them that these are what my goals are and I want to apply to medical school. And if you have that relationship, they'll be a lot more comfortable in writing you an extremely strong letter. Also, in some cases, they would actually ask you to draft a skeleton letter for them, in which case you can put whatever you want on there and they'll be able to just filter it out and submit it on your behalf. So this is basically one of the easiest check marks on your application. You just don't want to screw it up by getting a reference who you have no idea what they're going to write about you and risk your entire application. Most of the time, having a good reference won't really seal the deal for you, but if you have a bad reference, I think that it can definitely hurt your application a lot. Next slide. Okay, interviews. So again, I'm not going to go too much into depth about these interviews, but because this could be an entire presentation on itself. I know that Kashif Bhai has been very generous in in the past with myself and Kizzer and others lending his time and helping us prepare for these interviews, because these interviews aren't a joke. Even though once you get a medical school interview, your chances can be anywhere from 1 in 5 to 50-50 in some cases, half the battle still remains. I think at that point, the most important thing for you is to start preparing for these interviews in a way that I'll give you an example. One of my good friends at McMaster, she got an interview after the 3rd year, okay? And she got an interview at McMaster. And the chances there, I think, were like 50-50 almost, or even more than that if you consider the wait list. And she didn't get in, and it's been 3 years and she hasn't got a single interview since then, which was pretty unfortunate. But she got that close and she wasn't able to get in. Whatever the case was, maybe she wasn't prepared, or maybe it just wasn't in her, luck. But when you do get an interview, you definitely, again, you guys are, rest assured, you're in the right place. So, no one in this room wants anything from you except to see you succeed. So if you guys do ever get to that stage, definitely reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help you prepare. Just to glaze over the different types of interview styles, MMI is getting more and more common. I think this was actually started at McMaster. Is based on OSCEs, which are basically a sort of a simulation where you have a number of doors in a row, and behind each door, there's either an actor or there's a different scenario or a problem that you have to face, and you have to go in and speak to that person, or speak to the person that's grading you, or speak to an actor about how you would deal with that sort of a challenge. In some cases, it can even be a quote that'll be on the door. You'll have about 2 minutes to read the quote or read the description, and then you open the door, you go in, and you have about 7 minutes to speak about that topic to the person, and the person's going to give you a grade, and then the bell will ring, you go out, you go to the next door, and there's usually like 10 stations, and basically everyone's just going in a chain, and that way they can see a number of different applicants in a quick succession, and judge who, or basically give you a grade based on that. Traditional interviews are the ways that it has been done since time. Traditional interviews can be either one-on-one. So if they're one-on-one, usually what you'll see is it will be one-on-one with a faculty member, and then one-on-one with a 4th-year medical student, for example. There's also traditional interviews which are panel-based, so there will be 3 or 4 panel members. Again, usually it'll be a faculty, a community member, and a senior medical student. And then you'll sit with them for 40 minutes and just have a conversation. And in that case, they'll ask you questions like, why do you want to do medicine, the presentation that we had, to start off today's event, and a lot of other questions. And they have your file usually in those traditional interviews, so they can ask you anything that you've put on your application. If you put an activity that you don't really know much about and you can't talk much about it, it'll probably raise a red flag. One more note, MPI is this unique sort of interview. It's a mix between the 2 traditional and MMI interviews. It's only done at U of T, and instead of 10 stations, it's 4 stations, 4 one-on-one interviews, and the questions are a bit more traditional, or what you would expect, as opposed to creative questions that you see more frequently in MMI. Next slide. Okay, just some additional considerations now. Some of the things you do want to consider is applying to medical school is not an easy process, and so you do have to be honest with yourself and think about what trade-offs you're willing to make. You're spending 4 years, at the end of which you have a science degree, which you're not really sure what you can do in, and this is, I would say, the phase that we were at before we got into medical school, where we were still trying to get into medical school, Kizzer and myself, for example, and a lot of our friends were starting to get jobs of $80,000, $90,000, and there's at least 10 years, if not more, before we earn our first paycheck. So, it is a long process, and you have to think about, are you really that invested in it? Why are you so passionate about doing medicine? Are you in a realistic range where you think you can get into medical school? Another example, one of my friends who was actually started undergrad with me, and he left after 1 year to the UK. This year, he's actually graduating from medical school. But again, it might be another 5 to 10 years before he can come back and practice in Canada. And at that point, he's been there for 10, 15 years in the UK, so he might not even want to come back. So that's another consideration. Just in terms of the application expenses, MCAT usually costs around $300 US. If you're taking a course that Maham spoke about earlier, it can be anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 depending on what type of course you take. You can also do self-paced learning where you use free resources online and maybe just buy some practice tests. Those are a lot cheaper. The OMSAS application is $210 and then an additional $100 for each school. Out-of-province schools are usually around $100 to even $200 just per school, so that can be expensive. The US application, $200 and then additional $40 per school. So if you add up all of these expenses, they end up being a couple of $1,000s, especially if you're applying for multiple years. So you have to factor that in, that it is an investment. It's a very long investment before you're going to get your first paycheck as a doctor. So just keep that in mind. And then there are also other expenses, interview travel, clothing, the gap years, and things of that nature. Okay, next slide. Okay, just a couple of things now just to be wary of when you, common mistakes and things like that people make during their application process. Number one is not being able to get your personality across. So like I said, one solution is start making your log of activities earlier on. Think about what you want to be involved in proactively. So over the next 2 years, if you have 2 years of undergrad remaining, plan ahead. And then in the interview, put a lot of effort into that interview to prepare. Applying too early, like I said, or with unrealistic expectations. If you rush it in 3 years and because of that you take some very hard courses all in one semester just because you want to get them over with, and then you end up with like a 2.0 GPA that semester, that might set you back for multiple years. So be cautious of that. It's like I said, 25 years and 26 years is not that much different in the long run. So it's not a race, and don't treat it like a race. And I talked about this already, selecting the wrong application and references or verifiers. Silly mistakes, so again, do get people to read over your applications when you're submitting them. Spelling mistakes and things of that nature, you should definitely minimize those as much as possible. Another thing that we actually came across I came across when I was applying, professional admission services. Some of these services, when you get an interview, they charge fortunes. Or you might hear people say that, oh, if you want to get into medical school, it's so hard that you have to pay someone $2,000 because they know exactly what to write on your application. That's not true at all. I did my application myself. I'm not a professional. We all did our applications ourselves. You don't need to pay anyone that large sums of money to look over your application. You have us. You have your other mentors to be able to assist with that. If you still want to check it out, some services are helpful. Interview prep services. If you want to have some mock interviews with some sorts of organizations, but just be conscious of that. But even with, I would say, just to start wrapping up, even with us, a lot of the help that you are receiving, of course, none of it does come free. You have to do your part as well. You can't, again, Kashabay is a perfect example. He's been helping us for so many years. He even came here today, all the way from Western Ontario, just so a handful of us could have a better shot at potentially getting into medical school. So you have to put in the effort yourself ahead of time. You have to do everything you can, and then proactively be in touch with people, reach out to them, and focus a lot on your prayers. Just to end off, I just want to give my personal example. So next slide. Trust Allah but tire camel first. I think this is something that the Holy Prophet ﷺ said, and I think it's very true that if you do put in the effort yourself, and then have faith in Allah, you will, inshallah, you will be successful and you'll be able to accomplish your goal. Just go to the next slide. I think I had. Okay, yeah. One more thing I just wanted to talk about before I wrap up. If you don't get in, what to do in your gap year. Again, in the past, this was a long presentation on its own, but I just quickly want to touch on a couple of things. First of all, you're not alone. I would say as much as 50% of applicants to medical school at least take the MCAT multiple times or apply multiple times. If you do get in on the first shot, your first MCAT attempt, your first application, you consider yourself very lucky, but also very blessed. and don't use that as a, don't become arrogant because of that, because there are people who take multiple years and multiple attempts and have to put in a lot of hard work, who may not have been as lucky as you are. So just remember that, and definitely in my case, I know that there were a lot of people's prayers and a lot of hard work. I gave some examples today that really made it happen for me. So be conscious of that, but remember that you're not alone. And practically, what you need to do is assess your weaknesses. Look at what what areas of your application were the weakest. Whether that's a section on the MCAT, whether you got 5 interviews and didn't get any one of them, then likely it's your interviewing skills that you need to improve. Have multiple backup plans. So think proactively. Next year, around the same time when your application is being submitted, what are the changes that you want to have in your application? Speak to different people about it, and a lot of them are pretty well-paid, respectable career paths. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just to end off back at the point of having faith in Allah, last year, my story is that I mentioned that I started studying in Michigan, in America, but before that I was actually on the wait list for the University of Ottawa, and that was my first Canadian medical school interview last year, and I really wanted that more than anything, and I did the interview and everything, and then I heard back that I was put on the wait list. And I really didn't want to go to the States at that point, even though when I initially heard about the States, I was really excited, but then I got put on this wait list, and it was like, I just want to stay in Canada, I want to be closer to my family. Ottawa, you slowly fall in love with it because you think about it for so long, you're waiting to hear back, you prepare for your interviews, all that stuff. And so that didn't work out for me, and I went to the States, and I started there, and for me, I thought that, it might be worth it to just put in another application. And I did that, and this year I was pretty blessed. I got 3 interviews, UBC, Ottawa again, and U of T, and I got accepted to UBC and U of T, and now, had I gotten accepted last year to Ottawa, I probably wouldn't have been able to stay in Toronto for the next 4 years. I would have been away from my family, and considering, in hindsight, at that time, I didn't want anything more than that, and now I realize that whatever happened was actually probably better for me. So, from the Quran it says that you plan and then Allah plans, and Allah is the best of planners. So, whatever happens, if you do face setbacks, just remember that and keep that in the back of your mind. And next slide, just remember that all of us are pretty blessed, and we've seen in every one of our cases, we've seen extraordinary blessings, and we've seen things happen firsthand. And I heard these stories when I was in your place, and I didn't know if it was going to happen with me, but it happened. And so, inshallah, it will happen with you as well. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah to our medical students for giving such an excellent presentation. Every year we do have different presenters, so even if you watch the presentations from previous years, and we have had different medical students presenting, you'll actually pick up different things. And this one actually has been one of the more detailed ones because I allocated more time to them in order for them to explain to you in detail. And this is really the core presentation. The other stuff is to make sure that you're understanding, are you applying to medical school because you're actually interested in medicine, or because you don't know what to do with your life, or your parents are just giving you that as the only option. So it's important, you cannot actually go through what they did unless you have passion, and it's very important for you to know that, okay, this is what I want to do. And we have a presentation now that just kind of explains what you're going to expect when you're in medical school. So I'm just going to pull up that presentation. This one is it says life in medicine, I think. Do you see it? Oh, maybe it's in that folder. This one? Yeah, you can just...
This one, right?
All right, so this presentation is traditionally given by Dr. Aman Ahmed, who wasn't able to join us today because she wasn't feeling well. So I'm going to give it to Dr. Lubani, who's going to go through it.
Okay, just one moment. I'm just going to, I'll be right there.
Hello.
Hello.
So, Assalamu alaikum. This, as Dr. Kashif mentioned, this is a presentation that Dr. Ahmed prepared, and it's an excellent presentation. So I wanted to make sure to say that up front because I don't want to take credit for it. So, okay, you've gotten into medical school. Now what? I think people don't have an idea sometimes what to expect, and it is important to know that once you get in, that's actually, unfortunately, just the beginning of your journey. It's not the end. Dr. Ahmed had some information about herself. I'll skip that because that was her journey. So her advice, and mine as well, and I think we've said that many, many times throughout this presentation, is know why you want to go into medicine. Not why your parents or your friends or the person you want to marry in the future wants you to go into medicine, but why you want to go. It's okay not to know exactly what you want to do in medicine. In fact, I would recommend that when you enter medical school, you enter with an open mind and an open heart, because my experience has been that those who enter with specific set ideas actually don't do as well, and often are probably entering with the wrong ideas. It's okay to take lifestyle and personal reasons into consideration for choosing a career. In fact, you should take lifestyle and personal reasons into consideration because our lives are not unidimensional. There are multi-dimensional aspects to our lives. And if you don't take those into account, you're going to run into trouble quickly. Have your family involved. Like anything important in life, your family knows you, loves you, and you're going to need their support as you go through medical school. Get advice from others. But at the end of the day, know what you're doing for your own reasons and make sure that ultimately this is your own decision. And finally, medicine is a lifelong commitment, so you have to keep the big picture in mind because it's not just about 1 or 2 years. This is a quote from Hippocrates. So medical school itself is anywhere from 3 to 4 years. The vast majority of medical schools in North America are 4-year program. There are a couple of exceptions. In Canada, those exceptions are McMaster and the University of Calgary. I think the University of Calgary has either transitioned to a 4-year program or was talking about transitioning to a 4-year program. So for the most part, you're going to be expecting 4 years of medical school. Traditionally, your first 2 years of medical school are classes, so it's an in-class. What you're doing in school is what you would be doing in the first 2 years of medical school. You're sitting there while someone lectures you. There are also other opportunities. So most medical schools now in Canada have moved to what's called problem-based learning, or PBL or PCL, different forms of it, which means that you get together in small groups with your fellow medical students and you think about problems that are presented to you and you try and solve them, and you'll have a physician there present or a teacher there present to help you through it. But it's more of a, not just you sitting there and listening, it's more of you actually trying to work things out. The 3rd and 4th year of medical school are more your clinical years. So your 3rd year is referred to as your clerkship year. Your 4th year is traditionally an elective year. So your 3rd year is where you rotate. So your clerkship, you rotate through all the specialties, or at least as many of the specialties as you can, the core specialties. You get clinical duties, so you're actually interacting with and taking care of patients in your 3rd year, which is what all of us imagine to be medicine, and that's what you see on TV. You're not able to sign orders, you can't give people prescriptions, you're not a doctor, but you in many ways function like a junior doctor. Okay, yeah, some fun pictures. Once you've finished your clerkship rotation, so where you rotate through and do your clinical years, you graduate and you go through a process we've sort of skipped here. In Canada, this is known as the CARMS process. In the United States, it's called the NARMS process. CARMS stands for the Canadian Residence Matching Service. NARMS stands for the National Resident Matching Service. And it is a process where you apply to different specialties and then are matched based on your preference and the preference of your supervisors, the people who are wanting to hire for their residency. Once you get into residency, you start off your first year with the least amount of responsibility, and then slowly from there the responsibilities increase. So it's called a graded system or graded responsibility system. And you will do rotations that are in your own specialty. So if, for example, like myself, you got accepted into pediatrics, some of your rotations will be pediatric rotations, but some might be things that are related to pediatrics, like for instance, in my case I did anesthesia because I needed to know how do I intubate a baby, things like that. The thing that people don't realize about residency is that you do have long hours. So you can do call shifts that are anywhere from 12 to 24 hours. They used to go up to 32 hours and they've since capped the hours. When I was a resident, we did 28 hours. You often for these call shifts have to stay in hospital. So you sleep in a call room in the hospital overnight. And again, you're getting graded responsibility. So that means that your first year you may not have to do as much, but as you get more senior, you do more. I think that's probably a good picture there because that's how you feel when you're in residency. It's a very tough stage in your life. And for some reason, there we go. Exams that you have to do during medical school, the MCCQE1 is typically done as you're graduating from your 4th year of medical school, and the MCCQE2 is done during your residency. So these are not easy exams. And then there's a Royal College specialty exam, or subspecialty exam, and then the Family Medicine College has its own exam as well. And then finally, once you've done all of that, you've finished your residency, you've passed all your exams, then you continue on to independent medical practice. And that means a lot of different things depending on what you've chosen. So you can be working in an inpatient setting, which means in the hospital. You could be working in an outpatient setting, which is what you think of when you think of clinics, like your family doctor's clinic, or other clinics you might go to that are not in hospital, outside. Or you could do both. Some people choose to do both. You can be self-employed, like a family physician would be, for example, or a general pediatrician in the community. Or you could be employed within a hospital setting. There is flexibility in scheduling, depending on your specialty, which is amazing. It's not something you would have in most jobs. And you can choose to work in an academic setting, so working with a university, or what's called a community practice, which means you work outside of the university and hospital setting and do work individually. Or you can do both. Some people do both. And finally, when you're in practice, there are mandatory continuing medical education requirements by each and every college that you have to meet, and they usually run through a cycle. So don't think that once you've graduated, you're done. Oops, did I skip a slide there? Okay. So there are many, many opportunities to get involved even once you're out in practice as a physician. There are many different societies, including the Canadian Medical Association, Public Health Ontario, etc. They're all listed there, and there are many others. And then again, we're back to the CanMeds role. We keep talking about this because the medical students love this stuff, or the medical schools love this stuff. So the key to all of this, oh my gosh, this thing is not working. Oh, there. The key to all of this is finding balance somewhere. And of course, anyone who tells you can have it all is lying or stupid or something, because the truth is that in life, there's always something that has to give. So, at some point in your life, maybe you're focusing mostly on work and career and academics, and that's fine. And for instance, when I was an undergrad in medical school, that was me. I was really much more career-driven. And then there's a point in your life that you might say, okay, I'm much more family-driven, and maybe you're very interested in friends, maybe you're taking care of yourself and thinking about self-reflection. But you have to, at some point at least, think about all of these things, even though you may not be doing each of them perfectly at one time. Because if you let one atrophy and completely go, you're going to suffer. Your life will suffer. So if you let your family completely go, your friends, yourself, or your work, that's not going to be a very good life. And then finally, some of you may have heard, there is a very high rate of suicide actually among medical students and physicians. And it's very sad. And alhamdulillah, our religion guides, God guides us in the Quran, and we are guided by the example of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that you should not despair. But the truth is, depression is real, and in many cases there are medical, clinical, biochemical reasons for this depression. So if ever you're finding yourself getting there, you should seek help, reach out, because we are a community of hope, not a community of despair, and there is always hope. And then finally, how do you get through all of this, right? Like, we've just painted this very long picture for you. My journey to independent practice took me through 3 years of undergrad. I got accepted after 3 years, so alhamdulillah, I was lucky. And then after 3 years, I did 4 years of medical school, I did 4 years of residency, and then 2 years of fellowship. It's a very long road before I could actually go out and practice and earn the money that I like to sort of move on in my life and maybe have the family that I had wanted, because it's tough to do that while you're in the middle of your studies. So what is keeping you going? You have to find some motivation through all of this. Whatever motivates you, as long as it's a healthy path. Spirituality is always very important. I think whatever spiritual means you find, whether it's, as Muslims we find spiritual solace through the Quran, through halaqas, through meeting with other Muslim brothers and sisters. But there's, friends of mine who are agnostic or even atheist find other means of spiritually getting themselves through. And family and friends, of course, are extremely important, not to be underestimated. Managing your time is very important, and then taking care of your body, because God has tasked us with taking good care of our bodies through exercise, through good eating, etc. And then asking for help, because we all need help. Finances, I think you've heard a little bit about this, so I won't go into it. Yeah, it sucks to be in medicine, because financially, as you're going through it, it's not easy. But there are ways, especially in Canada, we're very lucky, right? I won't go into that because you've already heard so much. And finally, the challenges of medicine. It is very physically demanding, mentally and emotionally demanding. When you see people at their worst, I've been attacked by patients, for example. I've been physically attacked. I've been verbally assaulted. And also the other end of the spectrum, when you're seeing people suffering, it's very sad, right? It is a complex and difficult work environment. You're interacting with many different people in many different disciplines and many different egos. And also you're interacting with people when they're at the toughest. Like, people don't come to the hospital when they're happy and healthy, generally. And finally, it's a very intellectually demanding, although personally I think that's one of the positives of medicine. What are the rewards? It is extremely humbling. The more you think you know, the more you realize you're an idiot. And I've learned that many, many times. Just when I think I'm super awesome, I make a dumb mistake, and I'm reminded that I am a human and that I am not awesome. Fantastic career and that sounds like a bad thing, but that's an amazing thing, because I think so many professions lack that aspect, and a lack of humility in life is a terrible thing. Being conceited, that is something that God warns us about in the Quran. Fantastic career and stable career, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I work 10 shifts a month, and I could support a family on my own with my salary working 10 days a month. So that's huge. Diversity, you're never bored. Yeah, absolutely. I have one shift, and in that shift I could see an ear infection, and then in the same shift I've also seen a broken elbow, and then I've also seen someone whose heart is not working properly, and I need to do something about it. So that's just my job. There are many other jobs that are even more diverse. It's always changing, and you have lifelong learning going on. That should be going on anything you do in life, but unfortunately some things stagnate. And the really huge thing is the ability to do humanitarian work locally and abroad, and Dr. Kashif Ahmed will talk about that more. So find your motivation, and as Muslims, I had a colleague from the United Arab Emirates who was really just an awesome person, and I remember her saying to me one day when I was complaining that it was very difficult to do the 28-hour call shifts. She said, Iman, when I'm on call, every time they call me and I'm tired and I'd rather go to sleep and they're telling me to come care for a patient, I actually intentionally and consciously make the intention that I'm going to go care for this child and this family for the sake of Allah. And then inshallah you do it as part of your job, but you also get reward for it because you're doing it with the intention of pleasing God and helping God's creation. And God tells us in so many places and in so many ways, help His creation, and whoever saves a life, it is as though he has saved all of mankind. And that's it. Thanks to Dr. Ahmed for that beautiful presentation.
I'm just going to give him the mic. I'll be right back. You can just take the microphone and just say I'll do it.
Don't forget to stay for the Q&A period, because I think that's probably the more important part of all this.
Kashif is just bringing your son over. He will be right back.
Can you, hold on. It's on. Just on. I know it's been a long day, so we're going to end quickly. Most people, their brain shut off after 30 minutes. So this may you may have noticed that in either university, or you will definitely notice that in medical school. So I always end with something that will maybe wake you up, some pictures, and it's mainly to motivate you. Everything that has been said today has been excellent. I encourage you to ask really good questions when we're finished. But this is just a quick presentation on things that you can do once you've gone through that long journey and now you're practicing medicine. All right. So again, I practice emergency medicine, so I do have a narrow perspective. But I encourage you not to be influenced by that. Like, if you remember that slide, there are so many specialties in medicine that fits all different personalities. So because I was interested in general medicine, which is you see people through their whole life cycle, you see a newborn, you see a child, you see them as they grow up as an adolescent. Believe it or not, there's actually a specialty called adolescent medicine where you just take care of teenagers. And then you see them as adults, they grow and they get risk factors, and then they, when they're about 50, and then when they're elderly, and there's a specialty on geriatrics. So I just love that whole journey, and so when you practice that, you have the ability to go and do work abroad because you have the ability to treat different people from different age groups. So I did a couple of things, and I'll just go through that. So the first thing is I worked in a rural area in Canada because I went to the Northern Ontario School of Medicine. We had the opportunity to meet Aboriginal people. So next slide. I went to Manitoulin Island and stayed on an Aboriginal reserve for a month, which was an amazing experience. It was actually as a medical student. For those who saw this presentation, I give it every year. I apologize, but I'll move quickly through it. I do it every year just to give you perspective on things you can do once you finish. Next slide. So we can just keep on going. Basically, what I'll do actually, this is the last presentation. Just give me a second. Actually, could you go to the other side and just get me the remote? That way I don't have to keep on saying next slide. So I did a couple of things, and that includes going to India. My parents are both from India, so I would go to Qadian often. And so when I was in India as a medical student, it was around Jalsa time. They have a hospital there run by Jamaat. And it's called Noor Hospital. So I also volunteered there. So I had a really good experience. Next slide. I took some pictures out to make it shorter, but I had the opportunity to see people from the surrounding Punjab region. Many of the people who presented were not Ahmadis, even though the hospital is meant for people who are working in the Jamaat administration. So a very different kind of medicine that you're used to working in or seeing in the West because of resource limitations, but really that gives you perspective of, number one, how much waste there is here and how much little you need to practice medicine, and the struggles that others are going through in different parts of the world. So I also had the opportunity to work in Palestine, so I was in the West Bank for a month. So this was an opportunity I had as a medical resident in my second year. And so I worked actually in, this is a clinic, or it was a building with a clinic. This gentleman is a Christian Palestinian who's a cardiologist, so I worked with him. I worked with the Palestinian Medical Relief Society. This is Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. He's a politician in Palestine and also a physician, and was head of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society at the time. You know, we were involved in these kind of remote clinics in the West Bank, really kind of in barren areas, rural villages, where there was decreased access to healthcare, primary care primarily. These are primary care clinics. Everyone is providing either basic pediatric care, basic family medicine type gynecological care for women, etc. So we had a kind of a mobile setup in a school where there was actually a mini pharmacy, and we actually have a lab. See that lady with the microscope? So that was pretty good. They actually did a really good job. And then we had a female physician with us for all the kind of OB, or the gynae cases that would present. This is the pediatric hospital I worked at. It's the only pediatric hospital in the West Bank, and it's actually run by a Catholic organization. A very interesting experience. You're seeing medicine from a different perspective, especially because of the military occupation there. And that's an example of that, what's going on. That wall divides basically half of Bethlehem, where that hospital is. So I also had the opportunity to go to Gaza. Gaza is another part of Palestine that is technically occupied. And so we had the opportunity to go there to provide, there's different ways of doing volunteer work. You don't have to go and just provide medical care. A really good thing you can do, because you're blessed to live in Canada, is to go provide medical education. So we actually went there to provide medical education to staff in their main hospital, Al-Shifa Hospital. We provided education on what we call ACLS, or Advanced Cardiac Life Support. And so these are some pictures of actual Gaza City. These are some people who are taking the course. I'm in the red shirt. The person on the left in the black shirt is one of the residents from Western that went with us. Unfortunately, while we were there, a war broke out between Hamas and Israel, and so basically we were there in a mass casualty incident, a scenario which is very kind of overwhelming for local health resources, and you're getting more patients than you actually can treat. And so it's an experience that very few physicians in Canada ever see. I mean, we are very rarely even get, luckily, shootings and stabbings in Canada, unlike the United States. So seeing civilians who have been hit by shrapnel, etc., and exposed to explosives was definitely a new experience. And I wasn't as experienced as I am now. I was only a third year resident at the time in emergency medicine, so it was definitely a learning experience, seeing young, healthy patients in those kinds of trauma situations. So I also had the opportunity to go to Guatemala with Humanity First USA, and there we provided kind of remote clinics as well. All of it was primary care. And luckily, for example, because I was trained in general medicine, they had some internists with us, and they usually get a pediatrician. Because I was the only generalist, they asked me to do most of the pediatrics. The whole time I was there, I was just running the pediatrics clinic, which was fine. I did have the training, and most of it was primary care, and I knew when to refer to a pediatrician. And this is actually after my first year of practice doing emergency medicine, so now I'm no longer a resident. This is a really good opportunity. A lot of the people who were there were actually med school keeners, and they were using this as part of their application, and plus they were able to get such a good experience. It was a very, very good trip, and I highly recommend it. Of course, it's run by HF USA, so, but they welcome Canadians to join them. We had a lot of volunteers locally as well from Guatemala. This is our mini pharmacy. A lot of these are undergrad students. And such a beautiful place. Yeah, I'll show you a picture of an active volcano. That's one of the patients I was taking care of. They have a lot of active volcanoes, so in the distance you'll see one smoking away. We were also using the school, that's the makeshift clinic, and then I had a translator, so it was, obviously I can't speak Spanish, and if they don't just speak Spanish, they speak their own dialect because they're living in rural areas. So these are all pictures that we took there. So luckily we did have some equipment that we could take care of, like someone was actually having pretty severe asthma. A lot of these people are undiagnosed and undertreated, and so we were actually nebulizing, it's a drug called Ventolin, it's a bronchodilator. It basically opens the lungs because asthma is a disease that you have constriction and obstruction of the lungs. So large volume of patients, actually. It was incredible how many people we were seeing in a day, and they were very, very nice, and very nice people. Unfortunately, this gentleman ended up in an accident. He was on a motorcycle and he was hit, unfortunately, by a police car, and so they were near us, so I just kind of helped out. We have a very nice masjid there. That's the local Murabbi and his son. I forget his name, unfortunately, and that's our masjid, actually, in the capital. So, if you go there, we have an established community. Hazur had instructed HF USA to help construct an actual hospital. We had a bunch of remote clinics. When you're providing chronic care to people, one of the downsides is that you're giving them medication for the diabetes, and then you kind of leave, and then who are they going to follow up with? So really, to provide proper care to people, you need long-term care, follow-up, and commitment. So not just a bunch of remote kind of satellite clinics. So this is a constructed hospital. It's actually an amazing place. It's such a nice facility that it just finished and it's open this year. It's called Nasser Hospital, built by Humanity First USA. It was their project, and now they can provide care to these people on an ongoing basis. And it actually has a surgical suite, and it's somewhere you can volunteer in addition to going to Rabwa or to Qadian or other Ahmadi Jamaat hospitals in Africa, for example. HF Canada is now getting into the kind of medical relief work. Before, it was doing mostly disaster relief work. So, as you know, Ansar's father is, head of Humanity First Canada. Dr. Aslam Dawood has started to work with the World Health Organization and create emergency medical teams, or a team, in order to help them with any kind of medical relief work that's required around the world. So I have signed up as a physician who could be contacted, and on May 22nd I received an email that they needed to send a team to the Congo to assist with the Ebola response, and another team to Gaza, as you know, was going on there recently. So unfortunately I was out of the country, so I couldn't go, but this is the kind of stuff you can do once you finish medicine, and you can continue exploring your passions. You don't have to just live and work domestically or in Canada. So we're now in the question and answer period. I hope all of you benefited from today. It has been recorded, and again, we'll be doing it next year. So it's not just a one-time thing. That's our website at the top. The video will be posted there. That's our main email address. You can give it to anyone. It can be the email address. You will contact us for any advice, mentorship, or if you need to contact any of the speakers, and if you didn't get their email addresses directly. Kizzer helps me manage a WhatsApp group for those who are in the pre-med stream, so usually those who are in undergrad. So once you get to university, just email us and we'll get you on that WhatsApp group. So now we'll open up to the Q&A, and feel free, I'll pass the microphone around.
Yeah, so I have a question about if you guys know about osteopathic medicine and like how that's like any different from allopathic medicine, like the process of getting in and all that.
Who wants to answer that question?
So, like osteopathic medicine, it's only available in the U.S., right? Like it was started in the U.S. and like they have like the legislation for the U.S. The differences, I would say, from a Canadian perspective, is that it's very new and it's not that understood in Canada. There may be some perceptive hesitancy towards it, but functionally, educationally, they're exactly the same. So if you go into osteopathic medicine versus allopathic medicine, you guys go into the same sort of curriculum, same sort of USMLE, you have to pass that as well. The residency programs are also merging as well, so you'll be licensed as a physician. The only difference I would say, it's not actually a difference, but rather an addition, is that you also learn a special therapy called OMT, so osteopathic manipulative therapy. That's just the way to adjust like the MSK system to like help you with pain and stuff like that. So in terms of differences, there's actually no difference, just an additional skill set that you gain.
Yeah, just to add to that, from my experience in the U.S., there are a small number of people who have like Kizzer mentioned, their hesitancy towards it. But over there, as compared to here, it's pretty much like 1 in 4 doctors in America are DOs, and so it's no one really asks or cares there. If they consider it the same as doing medicine. The fact is that because it's not as well known, it's newer. The admissions statistics or averages are slightly lower, but every single year, especially in the past 10 years, they've gotten much, much harder to get into. But in terms of licensing, you'll be exactly the same after your residency in terms of privileges.
And also, because like there isn't a large prevalence of DO physicians in Canada, like there is a lobbyist movement happening at various universities in the US to sponsor Canadian students to come and study there and then help them go back, because they want to increase the prevalence of DO physicians. So I personally think it's an extremely good opportunity, especially like if Canadian systems isn't going well. It's a legitimate opportunity to become a physician and also receive quality residency training, as opposed to going to the Caribbean or abroad where you're not guaranteed a residency spot, and if you are, it may not be a quality residency spot.
All right, so we're just going to go back and forth. So one question from the men's and one question from the women's. Please use the microphone. Is there a question being asked, or?
Yeah, but she'd like me to ask. So sorry. Okay, so her question is, what kind of courses should she take as her electives? Because in every diploma or degree program, you have some mandatory courses and some options. So what kind of courses should she take? So I guess it depends on what your degree is in. So like I mentioned earlier, like for the MCAT, I guess, you should be taking like core biochemistry, biology, physical and organic chemistry, physics, math if you want to, physiology, like all of those things will probably help you for the MCAT, and even if they don't, they're going to help you in the future if your goal is medicine. So are you asking like aside from those, like if you're in a science program? Well, I guess the electives are for me, like if I'm trying to think back, I chose them based on my interest too, and also based on like Kizzer mentioned, like GPA, right? So courses that you know you can do well in, or that people generally do well in. Like you don't want to take like organic chemistry as an elective if you don't need to, because it's tough and it might bring your GPA down. So I think just choose courses that you both have an interest in and that aren't like so tough that they're going to bring your GPA down. So I think I took like English and like I don't know, history or something, just because like I was interested in it, I knew that I could do it. But it just depends on what. And I think also like if your core doesn't have psychology, maybe take that as well, because that helps with the MCAT, and generally it's not too difficult. But I don't know if the guys have anything else to add.
No. Okay. All right. We'll pass the microphone here. Anyone else have a question? No. All right. So no questions anymore from this side. Any questions from the lady side?
So the question here is it better to take one course in the summer, like in summer school, But what do you mean, like a mandatory course in the summer? I think if it's part of your, like if it actually is part of your degree and it's a required course, I think you should just take it during the year. But like it was mentioned earlier, like some of the summer courses, you might take a course that's really tough, because summer courses are like considered less when you're applying to medical schools in terms of your GPA. So if there's a course and you're like, okay, it's required, or I want to do it for the MCAT, but I don't think I'm going to get a really good mark in it, maybe do that in the summer. But I don't think you should you shouldn't force yourself to do it. It's only if you want to. Like I never took a course in the summer and it was okay.
Just one thing to add that we actually didn't cover in our presentations today. A lot of medical schools, someone mentioned that, for example, some medical schools will look at your top 2 years or your latest 2 years. Some schools, like U of T, will actually drop your lowest courses. So they will drop 2 courses per year of study. So let's say you're applying after third year, that will be 2, 2, 2. So 6 courses, or if you're applying after 4 year, 8 courses. But one thing that I actually didn't know, and I got screwed because of it, was that if you do not have 10 courses every single year, you can't take advantage of some of those formulas. So just be conscious that even if you are taking courses in the summer because they're hard, take an easy placeholder course in during the year, so you have a full course load. And the other thing is that you should always also make sure that 60% of your courses throughout the year are from your own year or higher. So if you're in third year, you should have 60% of the courses that are third year at least, and then 4 of them can be first year or second year electives. So you shouldn't be taking more than 6 out of 10 courses that are below your year.
There's a question over here, unless we're going back to the men's side.
So far there's no more questions. Oh wait, there is one second.
Okay, so Sanka, my question is actually about the difference. I think it would be to answer the difference between the U.S. schools and
hold it closer to your mouth.
The difference between the U.S. schools and the Canadian schools that you have noticed, and how the difference in how hard it is to get into both.
So it's funny because what I noticed when I went there was that no one actually really cares much about Canada except for us. For us, like going through undergrad here, it was a huge deal to, for someone to get into an Ontario medical school. Over there, even if it's U of T, which is like #1 in the province or whatever, no one really cares about Canadian school. They only care about their own top 10, and we also care about their top 10. So in terms of difficulty getting in, I still think that it's harder to get in here, but we've always said this, that we're probably the worst province to be in if you want to go to medical school. And the reason for that is you get no preference in your own province. If you apply to other provinces, they have quotas for their own in-province students. And then if you apply to the states, they also have quotas for in-state students. And you're also considered an international student on top of that. So even if there is a medical school in, let's say, New York, that has a much lower GPA requirement, like 3.5, 3.6, and they also have a lower MCAT requirement. Well, when they're taking international students, out of their class of 100 or 200, they only have 5 or 10 spots. And for those 5 or 10 spots, you're again competing with people applying, from Canada who have very good numbers again. So because of that, you are at a disadvantage. So I wouldn't say, because of that, there really isn't no easy route or route, regardless of where you go. In terms of my actual impressions of the American system, I was actually pretty impressed, and I was, when I left, it wasn't like, yes, like I have to leave here, and I mean, I get to leave here, I get to go home. It was actually bittersweet that I had this, great experience. I thought it was a very, very high quality curriculum at Michigan State where I was. And, they prepare you over 4 years to take the USMLE, and so they make sure that you're pretty competent. As for Canada, I can't really speak to that. Maybe Khizr and Maham can talk a little bit about their experience with the curriculum here.
One difference I would say, between the Canadian and the American curriculum, is that the American curriculum is way more science heavy, because they have to write what's called a USMLE, and that there's a step 1 and there's a step 2. Whereas Canadian students, we have to write the MCCQE, which is equivalent to the USMLE step 2. That's more of like a clinical knowledge exam. So the U.S., it's like extremely focused on like core sciences, and what I mean by that is like memorizing the Krebs cycle and stuff. Whereas we don't. I hadn't seen the Krebs cycle since I started, so I guess that's one consideration. I don't know if Maham wants to add to that.
I don't really have much to add, except like I guess if you go in Canada, like the curriculum isn't really the same across schools because I don't think there's like a regulatory body that says, okay, these are things that you absolutely have to have in the curriculum. Like I think there's a lot of freedom for schools to choose what they want, and I guess the structure really like differs depending on what school you're in. So at U of T, like we're in the second year of this new curriculum, and it's like very, very different to what they've done in the past, right? So it's kind of like you're guinea pigs because you don't know whether or not this is actually going to be worth it in residency and whether we're going to know anything in residency. So I guess you kind of just have to like trust the process and hope that you get out of it what you want. But yeah, I agree with Khizr, like what we have right now, it's a lot of like, okay, clinical, like management, and that's why I think like if you do a degree in science, it really does help solidify concepts because if you don't have the background, all the clinical stuff is just dry memorization, and no one likes that and no one can remember that. But if you have the background and you know a little bit of anatomy and physiology and just basic science, it might make your life a little bit easier after med school as well. Okay, so I'll hand it over here to the question.
Yeah, is there another question on the women's side?
Okay, so my question is, when you're applying to medical school and you don't want them to count like your first year or second year grades, can you do something about it, or like is it specific to every single medical school? Okay, so most medical schools are going to look at your GPA. Like, I think, like someone mentioned earlier, like there's some schools like U of T where you can drop your worst courses and drop your lowest grades. But I don't know if a school that's going to completely discount all of first and all of second year because really what else are they going to go on, right? Like if you're applying in fourth year, then that means you only have your third year marks. So I don't know if there's a school that's not going to look at GPA at all. Like all of them really heavily think about GPA. But I remember when I was applying in OMSAS, there is like an essay or like an application part where like if you have had other circumstances in your life that have affected your GPA or your MCAT scores, I think it was specific to GPA, you can talk about that in that like spot, and you can say, okay, like maybe you're someone who's having a kid during that time, or maybe you lost someone important in your life and that really affected your grades. I think you can put that in, but I think that's only that they only consider that in really specific circumstances, and they might not consider it for 2 entire years. It might be for like a few courses that you've done not so well in, but like your overall image is that you've done well. Yeah.
All right, I'm just going to add something because I was in and out of the room for childcare reasons. I asked Khizr and Ansar if they had covered this document. I don't believe you guys mentioned it. For those of you who want specifics on the exact requirements for every medical school in Canada, this organization in Canada, the Association of Faculties of Medicine of Canada, release this document every year. This is the 2018 version. In here, it gives the exact specific requirements for each school. And you'll find out that some schools, when I was applying to medical school, you needed to be in a science, you need to have a science degree. You needed organic chemistry. Everyone called it Orgo, everyone hated it. Everyone did it in the summer because everyone bombed it, and no one could get more than a 70 in it. So it was just a huge thing you needed to go through. Then all of a sudden everyone realized, let's just be touchy-feely. You can have any degree you want. So then the strategy was go to the easiest school, go to Brock University, get the easiest degree, and just come out with a 99% and you're in, right? And so some people do that, and so to answer that question, does this medical school need an MCAT? Does this medical school even need a medical degree? Or which courses do I need to choose? Do I actually need to choose these science courses? If you read this document, you'll find out exactly the answers to those questions. And you can help design your program either to strategize to get into medical school or just to pick courses or to avoid courses you don't actually need. So just please remember this. Any other questions from the men's side? Okay, one second.
Assalamualaikum. My question was regarding mentorship that was talked about. Is when you do reach out to someone, how do you maintain contact? Because that was said. Because once you talk to a professor one time, how do you go back to him and keep that going?
I can speak to that if anyone else doesn't want to.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, well, for me, I think once you reach out to them, I think you have to talk about what you want from them, and also if you can work with them in some capacity, right? So, for instance, if you're reaching out to a professor who does research, a good thing would be to reach out to them, and then if they reply, send them your resume and send them for me, I send them my transcripts because that was my in, because I knew my grades were good, and that was my way to convince people I'm worth your time, I guess. So send them your transcript and your resume and say I want a volunteer research position in your research lab, or in with maybe another PhD or master's student who's already there. And I think you start with that in a small way, and maybe one summer that's what you do. You just volunteer in their research lab. And if you spend enough time with them, or not even, it doesn't even have to be the professor, if you spend time with the master's or the PhD student whose project you're helping out with, they themselves can become mentors for you. So that was how I found research supervisors or professors that could be my mentors. But also it could also be lecturers, people who lectured you but maybe don't have a research lab. And I think that's really about a lot of professors have office hours, so if you feel comfortable, maybe go to their office hours and speak to them about things maybe in the content that you have questions about, and then eventually I think you will form a relationship where you can talk to them about medical school, or you can talk to them about your goals, or other things that you want to do, and don't be afraid, I think, to where they don't really want me here, I don't know how to ask for things. So I think if you are confident enough to ask them oh, this is something I want to do, this is a goal that I want to reach, can you help me get there? I don't know, most people in my life have been really receptive to that.
Okay, I'm just going to add to that. How many of you guys have done any research so far? Okay, yeah, so a big part of a mentorship, a reason how you can get a mentor is like Maha mentioned, is through research. And I'm not sure maybe for the young guys here, I know when I was in first year, it was extremely difficult to find someone who would take you on their research lab or their projects. So just general tips maybe might be helpful. When you are sending emails to research professors, the mistake I made sometimes was I would spend too much time in the email tailoring my email to that professor's research. For example, let's say he's doing cancer, I would write a whole paragraph about why cancer, I'm passionate about cancer. Next prof is about respirology. I write a paragraph why I love respirology. And I don't think that's the right approach. I think that to find someone to do research with, you should just honestly cold call, it's called cold calling, but cold email. Basically make a summary about yourself, I'm so-and-so, this is my transcripts, was mentioned. Transcripts actually a good indicator. It's a good metric for them to measure whether or not they should take you on or not. So I think that's very valuable. And just send bland emails. I remember, for me, when I was in third year, I was trying to get a research supervisor for my thesis project. I sent 500 emails. Just copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, and you get maybe a 10% reply. And then from then you can judge. Okay, now I got from these 500 people, 10 replied to me. I got interviews with maybe, let's say, 6 people, 3 of them took me on. Now out of these 3, who's gonna invest in me? Do you know what I mean? So you gotta change the tables a little bit. You don't want to go towards the first person that replies to you, because I mentioned before that you have to choose your supervisor extremely carefully. I've heard horror stories of people who have worked tirelessly for a year on a project, and they don't get a publication or they don't get an acknowledgement. So you want to be crystal clear with that with your supervisor, and you also want a supervisor that takes an interest in you, wants you to succeed, and is willing to lend a hand regardless of whatever the situation is. And don't go for a department head of cancer or stem cell research, because they're extremely busy It's great if they take an interest in you, but even if someone who has a small project, as long as they're with you and they're going to help you, that's more valuable than anything you can ask for.
I think just to add to that, outside of research though, it is usually difficult to get a mentor. You have to have some basis of your relationship with them, whether you're shadowing them, and a lot of people don't really like taking people just for shadowing. So one example that I can give you that of someone who I didn't actually really do anything for, but still was one of my mentors, was one of my English professors. So for I think it was one of the U.S. schools that I was applying to, one of the requirements was a reference from a non-science professor, academic professor. So in that case, it was my English professor, and I actually reached out to her well ahead of time. And I told her, like, I wrote her an email and I told her that, oh, like, I would love to meet you. I'm just applying to the States. And I actually showed some of the stuff I had done. So, like, some of the Humanity First stuff I talked about, I just shared that with her. And she actually was, like, some people might just not care. Others might take an interest in you. And then after that, I saw that she was given some, like, Order of Ontario or something like that. And then I just shot her an email and I said that, oh, I saw this in the news, congratulations. So I just kept in touch and made sure that she didn't forget me and that, you know, that relationship just didn't die off. And then when I needed a reference, I didn't have to convince her, I didn't have to run after anyone or, you know, go find a prof last minute who doesn't really know me that well. If you have that, you know, those relationships going on long term, it'll definitely help you that way as well.
All right, any more questions? I mean, one from the women's side?
No, we don't have any here.
Okay, so, you know, it doesn't end here, so you have the email address. So you have one question? Okay.
Alright, so